Hi, this is Spencer Hiko Martin.
This is episode 32 of Counterpoints. We've reached the Magic Johnson number.
Ooh.
Hopefully, I would say hopefully it doesn't end for us like it did for him, but it actually turned out fine for him. I'm not sure what was going on with that story. Why has there never been a chapter 2 of that? Why is everyone just cool with the fact that the movie was going one way and then what was the ending? Just kept going on, didn't he? And having a great life for that.
What was that South Park episode?
That was a great one. I did
episode.
enjoy
The
that.
Straight cash injection.
Yeah, he just injected money into his veins. Which, I mean, a lot of us have thought that. A lot of us have at least contemplated that idea. So, okay, speaking of someone who could have been dead but is still alive, obviously SPUNJ still has a career in esports. He's now successfully transferred his skills over to the studio. Although, actually, didn't you do like some desk work back when you were in like Vox or something? Didn't you do like weren't you on the desk at Kelowna, one of those events at one of the majors back in the day?
Yeah, I think I did Katowice and Cologne. I think they just put me up there to talk shit, so that was good fun. This is better.
That's all we all do, SPUNJ. You know,
you get paid for it now. Though. That's the
Some people make a career out of it.
Exactly. It's not. It's not whether we all talk shit. We all talk shit. It's just ideas. It's just what grade of shit you've got. And some of us have got that high. Like I've got the shit where that wagon goes by with the horses, and some of it's like spilling out the back where there's like the fence isn't quite right. Like the real premium grade thoroughbred horse shit. Like I'm coming with. It's packed. The diet is fantastic. Actually, I wonder what horses actually do eat. Oats or something, isn't it? So fairly healthy. Bit like DDK. Right, so see, Dan, compared you to something with a massive head there. The ratio's fucking off the charts, isn't it? So, okay, making everyone happy to start the show out. Won't compare his co-caster to any animals. I made that mistake once in the past. So, okay, Moses, moving briskly on. So, Moses, you are my co-host, like on every episode. And I'm not going to lie, everyone. It's not that we've all had a drink. I've had a drink. I'm incredibly hungover. And I'm hurting quite badly. So this episode is going to be a lot of precision passes, and then me sort of like, yeah, run, take it, Moses, run the whole way, man. No, don't throw it back. What are we doing? I'm going to be the cheerleader on this one. So, okay, obviously we're going to start out by talking about StarSeries. That was the big event recently. And so I actually have started doing a podcast as part of my Boomio sponsorship, where it's essentially like by the numbers if there's no Richard, basically. It's me and Pocket just basically throws it to me all the time, and I just give my thoughts about events. So I went quite in depth on this when he asked me like tons of questions about it. So luckily, the universe has obviously synced everything up so that I don't need to talk much on this episode anyways. It's my thoughts out there. But I've got these two guys here who are obviously both analysts, both watching a lot of events, who can give me their thoughts, and we can kind of see what they're thinking about it. So actually, the first place I want to start, because I think the best approach with events always is everyone remembers the last game's the best anyway, and everyone remembers the winner the most anyway. So it's better you just start with that as the topic. So let's start with that topic, the fact that FaZe won the tournament. Now, Chad, after Katowice, what did you actually think of FaZe? Like, did you think that the final was legit that they made there? Did you actually think they were a team that could win, a tournament at this scale? I mean, it's not this. Even though we've had all these upsets at the end of last year, there's still not that many teams end up winning these huge tournaments. No matter how good you are. What was your thoughts on FaZe coming into this one?
I didn't think like it would come so quickly than winning a big title like this. Based off of like what they did in Poland, it was more like they were a fresh team with a lot of skill, and they caught everybody else off guard because you can't really counter-strat what they were bringing to the table. And like with Carrigan on board, they did like a heap of like work for that grand final against Astralis, like a lot of little nuances to their strategies to counter what Astralis were doing. But then with this one, when it came into it, you could see all the pieces were clicking from the final in Poland, like especially that Inferno game. Like everybody was doing their job and everyone was actually like living up to their roles. Alu pushing down mid, being sick with the orb, doing things that they meant to do, and it looked like there was like a good future. But for them to turn it around and then go to back-to-back final, I guess, and do that to Astralis. It's another close one, right? But I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up that style for a long time, because one of the things that I noticed with the way they play the game is they're not super methodical in the sense of like an Astralis or something. They don't like put all the pieces together and get to a point and then they've strangled out the CT side and then they just collapse on them. They get to a point where and then they do like some random shit, run through a smoke, and because their players are so skilled, they just manage to pull off rounds. And I don't know if that's going to be something that will always work for them. They're going to have times where they're going to struggle to pull off that if people aren't having good days.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, the bizarre thing for me about the winning this tournament is that, except for the fact that obviously they were fantastic winning all the pistols and all the rest of it, I actually thought overall they looked better when they were at Katowice. You know, when they were at their best there, the ceiling looked really good. You know, that's actually what was weird about this tournament. You know, they obviously started off so poorly, and then they sort of limped into the playoffs. Just finally got there because they played SK on the last game, and then just sort of gradually leveled up as the playoffs went. It was quite a bizarre story in that sense. What did you think of the tournament for FaZe, Moses?
I think I, for the most part, agree with the sentiment that they looked better in Katowice. I know we said, was it the episode with Zeus where I kind of said that I wouldn't predict FaZe to win any events, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. And this is kind of one of those. I think obviously I don't know if they make those finals that massive pistol round streak that they had winning it, but the scary thing or the interesting thing, I guess it would be. Specifically that Inferno game when it got down the stretch, I don't know how FaZe won that game because I thought Astralis outplayed them on pretty much every facet of the game. Tactically, I thought they outplayed them. I thought that double op setup was really, really shaky. And just to be frank, I don't like Nico did not have a great tournament. I didn't think. I mean, he had some good games here and there, but overall, you know, that's not the level that we expect him to.
I mean, he looked better in Katowice, right?
Yeah, definitely looked better within the team in Katowice. And that's the thing. I don't see this many tournament wins coming if Nico's going to play at the level that he did in StarSeries. I thought, for instance, I thought Kiyoshima would have been my pick for the MVP of FaZe for this event for that grand finals. I think he's gotten to a whole new level. So I think that's kind of where FaZe is at right now. Is that they have everyone. They've raised up the levels of all like their you know, role players, of all the guys that kind of fill the team up, like the glue guys, but they need to find ways for guys like, it needs to be there like Rain, Nico, they need to find some consistency in those guys. They need like the heavy hitters to be able to come out for an event and be able to win you a match here and there, or have a good run through the tournament to kind of be that driving force. And I was just surprised at how quiet Nico was in a win, to be frank.
I mean, what I found a bit crazy about that final, what you're saying about the Inferno game, is I agree entirely. Like, basically, except for like a brief period at the beginning of the game, it looked like it was Astralis' map the whole way, you know. And then what's funny is, obviously, it's just perfect poetic justice that Astralis was at one point. I think they were 13-7 up Moses on that map. And then obviously they lost like very narrow form. But the difference between where Astralis came back against VP at the Major from 13-7 is
same thing.
That was all on the guys from Astralis were this time on the T side. So the difference is, like, for VP, if you're on CT side of train, sure, you can mix up your rotations, you can try and make a good read or do something risky, but in general, to some degree, you're at the mercy of the offense, you know, like they get to dictate where the game goes and then what speed it goes at. They get to dictate a lot of the factors, but that's why it was actually quite surprising to me that Astralis managed to lose this third map, because they were up 13-7, they're on the T side, and it's not like you can look at the game and go, right, Glaive, you know what, you blew this one, mate. Like, you made bad calls, like, you didn't make the right reads. In general, like, if I look at what, like, the entries they got and the bomb plants they got and the number of times they got into, you know, 2v2s and 2v3, I think Glaive did his fucking job here. It looked like he actually called a great T-side, and it was like individual plays from FaZe in general that won them the game from my perspective.
I think one of the weird things about that is I don't think it was possible for Glaive to call a bad T-side just because of how passive FaZe's defense was on that Inferno. When they had the double op setup, it was like right off the bat, like not really having any kind of commitment to challenging for mid control, for like a top mid, like where brackets are. They weren't really, I mean, they weren't at all really challenging for banana control. It was just like passive in the sights from the start of the rounds. And if you're a team like Astralis that, you know, thrives on the fact that you can get map control and what you can take from there, and you don't even have to challenge, you don't have to fight for it, it's just given to you. It's like right off the bat, here's all the map control you could possibly want leading up to the bomb sites. I think Glaive could have made any number of calls that would have come out to be correct, and that almost makes it even worse. Like, I have to go back and rewatch, but it's just like by some miracle it feels like FaZe was able to actually win that last map, especially going into overtime when they'd been running that double op setup for like 10 straight rounds. You know, this Astralis team, we've talked about how many times how good they are at adapting, how good they are at finding a weakness, and for whatever reason they just couldn't pull it out in the end of the rounds, even though they exploited the weakness many times. They started picking up the pace, they just couldn't close out rounds. So yeah, just some massive heroics from different players in that FaZe lineup down the stretch.
Hey, what did you think of the last map, Chad?
Inferno?
Yeah,
so I caught the first half, and then I was on an aeroplane for the second half. So I didn't actually get to. When I landed, you know, that's when we're getting to overtime because it's only a quick hour-long flight or 45 minutes or something shit. But I watched the Mirage game, which I was surprised, you know, went the way it did, being a 16-14 matchup. I thought like FaZe, obviously it's not a terrible map for Astralis, but it's one of FaZe's like best maps. Yeah. And then the Nuke one, even more of a surprise. I think that pistol streak definitely like helped FaZe a lot, especially in this final. But to be fair, I didn't actually get to watch all the games intently. I was traveling.
Okay. Fair enough. Right, Moses, I do have one point that no one really picked up on in the final, just because, I mean, obviously, the fact that FaZe won, there's so many storylines for us to talk about there, and all the things that happened with the pistol stuff. But one thing nobody seemed to be mentioning, actually, it's funny how some players really do just skate by and not get criticism just because they're liked, you know, is that I remember when Astralis did have the big lead on Inferno, and they were in that kind of position where, to me, it's like the American football scenario where you're 1 yard out, you know, and you've got all the downs, and it's like, right, you're going to get over eventually, surely. So it's like, what, like, do you do something risky at the beginning? Do you do something safe and just hope that that gets you over? It was almost that sort of a feeling, right, where you felt like, right, they're going to do it eventually. It's just how, you know, which round are they going to do it on? And one thing that I noticed was, I'd have to go and check the stat for this, but literally the entire time where they were like close to winning the game and they had this big lead, like Glaive and Dupree both were like just sat on like 10 kills for almost the entire time. Like it might have been 10 rounds. I'm not even joking. And I can get it from Glaive because if you ever watch him on the T side, he's like one of those in-game leaders who actually like is like an entry guy and the bait sometimes, you know. So especially when you consider that half to me was like, it was almost like there was a practice agreed between the two teams, like, right, we're gonna do static B defense and you just like hit the site every time. It's almost like that, you know, they just hit it again and again and again and again and again, and it was working to some degree. So if he dies in that where you're just running through a smoke and then the CT's in a different position, he kills you, I can forgive that. But I was amazed that Dupree just was invisible, you know. Because the thing was, it's not like Device had a bad game. Funnily enough, this is also what's so poetic justice, okay? So he didn't do very well in the major third map where they came back and won, and everyone was like criticizing him. He played fantastic in this final. He had like all the impact kills, you know, but lost the game. Yeah. What did you think, Moses?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly worrying. I mean, Dupree and Glaive, I mean, just looking at the stats now, both kind of have pretty bad stats for that series in general. I think it's the reason I think we didn't notice it so much when it was going on is because Dupree does play, you know, both of them obviously play a little bit more of that entry role, but I think the reason why we didn't notice it is because like we talked about, for a lot of these maps, they didn't really seem to have a problem getting the entry kills, despite the fact that some of their more aggressive players weren't playing very well. They were still getting into bomb sites. They were still getting plants on that Inferno game. They were still forcing rotations and having to play, you know, a post plant. And yeah, that's a little bit of a bummer, especially considering one of the big upticks for this team has been the fact that Dupree has been playing, you know, superbly well. You know, back to Katowice. Even before that, he's probably one of the players that we've seen the biggest jump in form. I don't think it's like a trend or anything like that, but obviously, if either of those guys has maybe 10 more kills, I mean, you can always go back and say what if, but obviously maybe a better game from those guys on an individual level. But it's hard to complain. It's hard to like pick out one person and be like, this can't be happening if, you know, they're getting, you know, with the run of success that Astralis has had, and then the fact that they're in the grand final, the fact they lose that third map in overtime, it's hard to like pinpoint one person. I mean, if they're just getting blown out in the quarterfinals of every event, like 3 events in a row, it's like, all right, come on, this guy's got to go, but or this guy's got to do better. But yeah, I mean, despite that, I mean, this is just the benefits of having this kind of team and the kind of structure and the kind of force that we've seen Astralis turn into, is that they can have guys like Dupree have a bad game and they're still going to be contending for championships. That's one. I mean,
they
were
1 round from winning this one, right? So yeah, that's pretty good still.
That's the trait of a championship team that we talk about, of the teams that can have the legacies, that can have the eras, is the ability to win games and win championships even through that kind of adversity, and they almost did it here. So yeah, I mean, moving forward in the future, Dupree, if he has like something that's more in line with a Katowice, more in line with a major performance, they could even take this one. So it's just kind of a tough situation. I'd have to go back and look specifically at what was going on.
Okay, so actually, let's take that topic then, because the way you framed it there, I think is very good for talking about FaZe again, actually, which is that we have seen with Astralis, the thing that's amazing is, it isn't like every tournament Device is the MVP and he's just the start, and then, like, you know, that's like the consistent one. He's a very consistent player, but other people sometimes, like, obviously Zipnix was amazing in Katowice. Yep. Kirby at the major had a great run in the playoffs. It's been different people throughout the tournaments. and yet they keep getting to the final, they keep winning, they're very close at least, you know, they're always contending. So the difference is when you go over to FaZe, even though you did just point out that they did win the tournament without Nico having like a great playoffs, which is true, in general, that's my problem with FaZe, is that's what I don't see them having. Like, I see the ceiling is great, and if they could hit this sort of ceiling again, you know, even once or twice, those are going to be chances maybe to win tournaments. You know, certainly they looked fantastic. And I also don't think, like, even though I do discount winning all the pistol rounds just because it's so incredibly unlikely. I mean, that's the reason we brought that stat up on air, is that it never happened before, that people just won every pistol round.
Probably won't
in
happen
all 3 maps.
again.
So the reason we were bringing that up is it's just extremely unlikely it'll happen. Now, I don't discount it entirely. That means you have a team of players that are very good on pistol rounds. That's a great thing, you know. That you can to some degree replicate that. You're just never going to get like 12 in a row again, you know. That will to some degree boost your stats, as it were. But the problem I have is, like, I don't see FaZe as having the consistency of an Astralis, you know. So I feel like that's the worrying factor if you want to look at them as, like, you know, because obviously when you win a big tournament, you beat Astralis, it should be like, can you be #1? Can you win the next tournament? Can it be the FaZe era, you know? What do you think, Chad? Can it be the FaZe era? Can they be #1?
No, I think that's like would touch on what I was talking about earlier, you know, with the way that they address their T sides, especially on a map like Mirage, right? So they'll do really fast strats where they're running through smokes and they're relying on catching CTs out of position as opposed to methodically breaking down the map like a team like Astralis does, or like an SK. And that's why I think when you have like an SK or an Astralis, they can have longer legacies, or they have the potential to do so. I don't think we can roll back the clock to when we had like a Fnatic era, especially with the current meta where, you know, they're just running around headshotting. That's kind of FaZe is in the middle ground of like a Fnatic and a very methodical like Astralis style team, right? And it's hard to continuously replicate those performances. And to just dial back a little bit, like Dupree was saying, he had a bad performance on that Inferno map. His impact in Poland was those huge clutches that he had, right? The Deagle 5k, he had that clutch on Nuke, and they were pivotal rounds, and that's where he got a huge boost in frags as well, and probably where you would consider him to have had the most impact in those games, which pushed them across the line. And that's another thing that's hard to replicate. You can't expect that to happen and bank on that to happen every time. And with what you're saying, FaZe is a team who, sure, you know, we know these players can roll in and do 1v5s and do crazy stuff and lock down bomb sites on their own. But it's so difficult to do that consistently. Those situations don't come to you all the time, and you can't be a miracle worker in every sense. So you need that. That's why methodical Counter-Strike and actually doing all your theory and doing all that, that's why those teams are much better than a team who relies on the players to have individual performances all the time. And I don't think FaZe are going to have like a huge drop-off. They're obviously going to keep pushing to get better. I don't think they take this as, hey, they obviously don't consider themselves world #1 at this point. We all would still say Astralis, but I think with the play style they have and the players they have to kind of keep going down the path that they're in, because they're going to have communication issues. They're going to have breakdowns that other teams, all of one nationality, aren't going to have. So that's why I guess if you can have a good event like this where everybody pulls off clutch rounds, everybody does their job to above and beyond, they can pull off a victory every now and again, but I don't see them being the world #1 consistently.
Yeah,
okay.
I would agree with that. I don't think they're going to ever. I don't think at least we haven't seen anything that says they're going to be able to take over that world #1, especially for any period of time. It would have to be like some kind of a dip for Astralis, where they had like a massive drop off the #1 spot, and FaZe just kind of occupies it just by sliding up. The good news for FaZe as well, though, is that if you look at VP and SK and how bad they've been, and then you look at Na'Vi and G2, who, though they had a good tournament, there's still question marks. It doesn't really look like there's any team poised to be able to overtake them in #2 at the moment. And any team you'd be confident in saying that, which is good for them. But I know this is an argument that, or not an argument, but this is a discussion I've had with Chad at Pro League, because he's, you know, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, is that we are very, very judgmental when it comes to, like, you know, teams being in the top 10. Like, that's a sick achievement in and of itself, is like being in that top 10 and being able to spike to win tournaments. It's like whenever we have these conversations, we're always like focused on, can this team be #1? And I mean, we kind of overlook the fact that they've already accomplished so much by being in that top 10, being able to beat any of the teams in the top 10 on any given day, that FaZe is still going to be in a very, very good spot. And all they have to do is every once in a while have that spike. Maybe Nico has a sick tournament where he carries them to a win at that event, and then they go quiet for a couple of events, but they're always still dangerous. And I think that's the key, is even no matter how rough the group stages are, like we saw, which, by the way, I think that group stage will be much more confident moving forward, because you'll look at how much they wanted to play cash in the group stage, and obviously their cash wasn't prepared to the level that they thought it was. Obviously they had overestimated how good they'd be on that map. Moving forward into the future, I think they're going to either improve their cash, or they'll just do a better job of playing more maps, because I think they played cash 3 times in the group stage.
Yep.
And they just got punished for it.
Yeah, well, obviously, another aspect of the tournament storyline was that it was the rematch of FaZe versus Astralis, and obviously now they're 1-1 in the 2 series across the 2 tournaments, and that's another aspect. It's not even just if FaZe can be #1, it's if we can have a really cool back-and-forth matchup, because obviously we all know, like, if you put tomorrow Virtus Pro against Astralis again, I bet it's a dynamite series, and I bet it really could go either way. The problem is, VP, for whatever reason, hasn't made it out of the groups of these last 2 tournaments, so they're not getting a chance to play them, you know. And so, with FaZe, what do you think of the actual matchup going forwards? Because obviously this was like a big statement to actually come back. I mean, let's face it, FaZe was the only team in the series that actually could have won all 3 maps when you look at how they played out, you know, whereas all of us on the analyst desk, we were going the other way, you know. We thought it could be Astralis 2-0, we thought, you know, the Nuke should be Astralis' map, you know. So I think a really exciting part going forwards for me was, you know, we made a lot of the big deal on the analysis desk, and maybe people at home who were more casual fans thought we were just like being nerds for no reason, but that veto was absolutely crazy. It was like that's an incredibly ballsy veto from both teams, and then both were like trying to play mind games and fuck with the other one, and so you ended up on 3 maps that, like, it could have gone totally different maps completely. Like 2 of the maps could have just not been played entirely. So I actually feel like you play if these 2 teams play in another series, okay, we get the rubber match, as it were, the 3rd one, we did a decider. I don't think it'll be like VP and Astralis where they just reran it and said, right, same maps again, just play again, you know, we're better than you. You could have any maps in this series. What do you think of the 2 teams playing again in the future, Chad? What do you think of this rivalry and how they match up?
We might see it again as early as IEM Sydney, right? And I'm pretty sure if they get to the grand final there, it's a best of 5. So I think that's where the true test will be. If they match up again there in a best of 5, I would have to put Astralis ahead in the head-to-head, because I think they have a deeper map pool, right? And they can still bolster that. Like, I think they have the best pieces right now to be a good Cobble team. Like, and I don't know, we have a bit of a break. I'm pretty sure they have a break now with events, right? Where they can actually spend some time and add into the map pool and really surprise FaZe with it in the veto. I know in a best of 5 you're only vetoing 1 map each, but you know, it could be something which they could really use to their advantage. Whereas I think FaZe they're in their infancy, right? They have to work through all these maps. They kind of have to fix a lot of problems. We said they have to work on their cache a little bit more than what they thought they did. And I don't know if they'd be willing to take a risk on Cobble, like, you know, Astralis are in the position to do so, especially going into the next major. That would be a huge piece for them to have against all the other teams. But as a matchup as a whole, the thing that surprises me the most is like that Nuke game. And I think when you look at it, it was what, an 11-4 CT half from FaZe. So that's a pretty big half. But to you know, the next time they might start on the T side, you never know where it could go. I think Astralis would still be my favorite in this matchup if we saw it again, especially in a best of 5 at potentially IM Sydney. But I don't want to say it's like an any given Sunday type thing. I just think if they were to play the matchup 10 times, I think you'd see Astralis winning 7 of them. It's just, I think the consistency is with Astralis as opposed to FaZe, who have to rely on all those individual performances, I think, at the moment.
I just think, I mean, it's kind of I think it kind of highlights how critical Nuke is if you're a team that wants to beat Astralis, because even though it's not like they've gotten very strong on it, but it still isn't like super deep into in terms of like they're not going to beat everyone on it. So if you want to be able to beat Astralis in a series, you're going to have to play Nuke, because obviously the only teams that have really they felt at least leading into this series that could probably challenge them on it were the VPs who were knocked out, was maybe NIP, who they saw have a very good game on it, but outside of that, and even NIP, they probably wouldn't be afraid of it, but outside of like VP, they're probably just thinking, who's going to fuck with us on Nuke? And FaZe, I mean, we knew they liked to play it. We knew they'd had some good results on it, but not to this level. And obviously, like Chad said, starting on the CT side, you know, it would be different if you're on the other side. Also, if they don't win that T side pistol round, which was in the middle of their 12 pistol round streak, then this is probably a closer Nuke game as well. So there's a lot of different variables that can go into that. But I mean, you have to be able to play Astralis on Nuke if you want to be able to beat them in a series, because they're more than willing to play that map wherever it is, because we've seen them willing to play it against VP. So if you're a team that doesn't have Nuke in your map pool, yeah, you can ban Overpass. But I mean, Astralis is just too deep from there if you can't play Nuke, and there's not a whole lot of teams who can play it on that level, which is kind of the scary prospect. And then obviously, if you're a team, I mean, FaZe removed Overpass instead of Cobble, which is the big gamble that you alluded to about the map veto. Yeah. But if you're a team that can play Cobble, it's still going to be a very, very difficult matchup to leave that in the pool. I mean, that's one of Astralis' best. They're extremely scary on that map. So it's like, all right, like, what decisions do you like? That's a big coin flip to be able to play Overpass against Astralis. So Nuke is going to be a critical map pool. I don't see many teams that Astralis is going to leave Cobblestone in towards the second rotation. So maybe you could do. I mean, that's a ban more often than not, from Astralis. So you've got to have very specific maps in your pool to be able to fight with them in a BO3 or a BO5.
Yeah, that's the wrinkle that I want to see in the future ones, because the whole point I'm making here as well is not only was this one crazy, but if you look and you look at how the philosophies of how the in-game leaders pick and ban, the next one should also be mind games again. Should be like some ridiculous picks, because for example, like at the moment, what's interesting about the teams is like they can both play each other's strong maps. Like we all know Astralis can play Train, we all know FaZe can play Overpass. So at the moment they're purposely doing like the gamesmanship approach, where it's like, okay, neither of us want to play Cobble, so we'll gamble that goes out there. We'll ban each other's strong maps. Like we won't play those maps. We'll go to the middle of the map pool, and that's where no one really knows. Like I don't think, like if you'd come into this series and you'd asked me, you'd said, right, FaZe wins one of these two maps and Astralis wins one of these two maps. The maps are Nuke and Inferno. I'd have said it the other way round. And I said, right, well, Astralis wins Nuke, and then, okay, maybe FaZe wins Inferno. That might be, like, it was bizarre that those are the two maps that they won, you know. Those were the really, like, the wild card ones to me. If anything, it would have made more sense if they'd have won Mirage, you know. I at least think on that one, Astralis is like, I actually, let's talk about that. I want to get your take on that. Because Astralis has got plenty of wins on Mirage. Like, statistically, it looks like a good map. But from what I've seen, it looks like they just win with, like, because their T-side style is like grinding T-side, you know, and like a mid-round read, and somehow they just grind out enough wins. But every game's like super close. It doesn't matter who they're playing, Na'Vi, Fnatic, FaZe. What do you think of Astralis on Mirage, Chad?
Watching them play their Mirage, they do, like, especially on their CT side, like I find they have like a lot of gamble setups, right? Like they do that 2 under the balcony at that A site quite a lot, and they don't seem like a team who's willing to take the fight in mid control, which I think is also super important on the CT side of Mirage. But I think Mirage is one of those maps that potentially lends itself to especially mixing up the pace a lot, being able to throw in the fast strats as opposed to just the slow default and then make a decision from that point. And there's not many players. I'd say maybe it's just you. We are saying Glaive, you know, he's a bit more of an entry in game leader. That's the same as Karrigan. But then you've got Kirby, who he's one of those players. I think he's like a comfort zone player. So I don't know if I can't remember if he's the connector player. I'm pretty sure for them on the CT side, and I see him getting potentially caught out quite a bit. Or he used to be the connector player. I'm pretty sure. And I remember just watching, and he maybe overstays his welcome in that position a little bit too much. Maybe it's just something they don't feel comfortable on, and that's why the games turn out to be so close. I'm just trying to like recall when I saw them play it last.
I think, I mean, to your point as well, because they are a team that like doesn't really fight. Like while VP like pioneered that meta to challenge for mid control like frequently and at all times, like Astralis back when they were TSM were one of the first teams that we really saw like bring in that like containment strategy, right, where they let teams have mid, and they just said you will go nowhere from here. I mean, and that it works to a degree, but the issue with that is when you're giving up mid that much, you're just gonna lose some. It's just the way the map works. Unless everyone on your team is hitting ridiculous shots. But I think that's why they always tend to have to grind out those halves, is because there's always going to be danger from mid, and you know that's such a hard area to really control. I think this is a map as well where I think Device has a big impact, because we've seen he doesn't get like the high volume kills these days, but the kills that he gets are massive amount of impact with that AWP, and that's where like especially in the mid rounds of their T sides, when he has the op, when the CT teams are running low on nades, on flashes, on smokes, that's when he like chooses to pounce. That's when he finds his one kill. And also, I mean, just as a team, with Chad, you mentioning the gamble stacks, this is a team that's obviously very comfortable with retakes, have a lot of coordinations on taking over bomb sites. So a lot of their CT sides are like that, I feel, across their whole map pool. Is maybe not like the intensity of the gambles, but they are willing to cheat, like an extra player over, maybe just take a risk, maybe just something they've read in their preparation. Maybe it's something they might have some indication is coming, but they're willing to risk having to retake a bomb site in order to stack one for what they think is the better defense. And then Mirage is those are the two big things on this map that I think decided for each team is how do you handle mid pressure, and then can you retake bomb sites? Because Mirage is one of the most important retake maps we have in the pool.
Because the thing is, we've seen some fantastic games on Mirage at these last few tournaments. Like, I've actually really been enjoying it. I feel like the map's kind of like got a second life. And it's funny because I saw an article the other day that Wallaby Beetle wrote, which was certainly an interesting point, where he made the point that basically he thinks the team that can be the best on Overpass and Train will be the one that will like dominate the era. Because if you look at like nearly all the top teams play those maps, and at times they've been strong. But I actually think Mirage is a map that's going to massively decide who wins these tournaments. Because think about the teams that play in, to some degree, like it. So you've got FaZe, Na'Vi has absolutely made that like a home. The new Fnatic's been playing it a whole bunch. VP and SK are classic teams on it, but actually SK's come back to it, you notice. They've really started playing it again. Fnatic, obviously, I mentioned, yeah, so I've got like, that's 6 top teams there. Aside from like someone like G2 who just permabans it, there's going to be a lot of series that's going to have a Mirage in there, either to decide or if it's like Na'Vi, they might just pick it as their first map. Like, what do you actually think of the map at the moment, either of you? Like, what's your take on it as it is?
You go, Jason. I'll give this one to you.
I think I don't know who I would consider even to. I think it's one of those maps right now that there's a little bit of confusion in it, because I don't think there's like a really like solid team that you would say is like the best on it, to be quite honest. And I think
it has that feeling of like a Dust 2, where it's like, even if on paper you're the best, like you win 7 out of 10 games, like who the fuck knows if you're even going to win that map if you play it right.
I think the problem with it at the moment, well, maybe not problem, but this is just kind of the situation, is that this is a map where, we say it every time, mid control is massively important, and it's also kind of ridiculous in the sense that it seems like such an op map, but like if you're an opper in mid, you are not productive. Every team knows the smokes now, so mid control is so important. But Terrace, all the smokes that we now know, base of catwalk, catwalk smoke, window smoke, connector smoke, either at the bottom of the stairs or the top of the stairs, they're so well known and so easy to throw, and now every team's kind of got the rhythm to at least take mid control, that I think it does seem like it should be a CT map, and I still think that in my brain it still is. But since teams just know all these smokes, there's really no great way to have aggression as CT on mid to actually be able to prevent that kind of mid control outside of like the hyper aggression of pushing mid. I think it's still so difficult to just say, yeah, we're gonna. You obviously can't put an opper in window. You're gonna have one player on catwalk and one player at top connector. But even they, like, once smoke subside, that's even still a dangerous peak for both of those guys. A lot of different opportunities for them to get picked off. So I think most teams on their CT sides kind of shy away from giving those players too much freedom and just say, listen, once the nades are up, if it's not a fast-paced strategy, don't overextend yourself. And once you're out of nades, or once they're out of nades and the smokes kind of fade, just fall back, and we'll have to just have a good read. I think it's starting to be a little bit confusing on how you rotate exactly as CT, just because of how easy it is for T's to get that mid control.
For me, this is my least favorite map in the pool for some time now. I've probably hated this map for 2 years, and I think that's because
loves Cobble.
I'm a big Cobble fan, Jason. Thank you. This map, I think, is a piece of shit because it's to play in a pug environment or a more casual environment or something like what I'm doing nowadays, as opposed to in a team. But in a team, it requires so much theory on the CT side to build on what you're saying, right? Once the terrorists take area, which they can do with limited utility and still have enough left to perform and execute, they can bully players away. And that's when the decision-making comes in from hopefully either the in-game leader, or you've taught the rest of your players well enough to make mid-round decisions on, potentially doing a mid-round retake of a certain spot on the map, or knowing to buddy up and push an area. And if they've used 3 smokes in middle and they've used a couple of Molotovs, that's when, your teammates need to be able to react, and you'd assume they can at this top level, to push A ramp and find that one player there, or push B halls and find that guy. But it's a map where you are taking a risk to get an advantage, and that's normally not what we associate. That's counterintuitive, right? Like, you shouldn't be wanting to do that. It's calculated to some degree, but I think it's just a very difficult CT side in that regard. And once you lose the economy, if you don't save up and get enough utility, you can't stop them, and then the T's can just. I think this is a map VP were very good at showing how to pace on this map. You know, they do their defaults, they take their mid control, and then they'd throw in like a fast A with a couple of simple pop flashes, and the CTs would all be dedicating resources, and you know, they do a 3 mid setup, and then you know you just get fucked. You just keep getting reset. But it is one that does allow for individual brilliance, and that's maybe why this is a map that FaZe likes. You can have a guy holding a position, or like we saw from Glaive, right, getting, was it those 3 P250 kills close to their ramp?
Yeah.
That kind of bullshit. That's one of the thing this map can do, because I think like even the T's are making risks with their calls as well. I remember when SK started to, not really innovate, but they brought into the game, you take the mid control, and normally what you do is you'd posture and wait for the smokes, and you'd hopefully force the CTs in the positions you wanted to. They started bringing in one where they'd actually flash through the deep connector smoke, have 2 or 3 guys pop out. No one in the A side is even looking at that connector smoke because you don't expect anything to happen. And I think it's just one that, even though it's been around in the map pool for such a long time, the innovation is still constantly happening. And as always, it's going back and forth in the way the map's approached. And it's not, I don't think there's a current meta for it. I think you can bring in any style you want. And as long as you can get your first gun round to work on the T side, you're going to have a successful half because you can snowball from that point.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Moses? Was there anything that occurred to you as you was telling you that?
I mean, just the only thing, I mean, it's true, I mean, about the utility and everything, but I mean, the only thing that really comes to mind isn't really Mirage specific. It's just, we've got, I mean, the economy game in this is just such a delicate balance right now with the fact that every single weapon is dangerous, that all the pistols are dangerous, that now it's even hard to say that if you don't have utility, it's going to be so difficult to win rounds, because you never know if like one round you're just going to roll like FaZe, just roll out with the deagle and you're going to get a kill like from long range, or you're going to have one smoke and you'll have Tech 9s coming through it and you'll just get a lucky timing and then the game's over, or you hit one lucky bullet at long range and then the round's over. So the economy is in such a delicate balance right now. It almost to a degree makes sense that FaZe is one of the scarier teams at the moment, since they're one of the best teams when it comes to not only pistol rounds but even if they have low econ, just winning those Tech 9, winning those Deagle rounds. If they ever learn how to play anti-ecos, it's almost, you almost think that this team could just win maps with SMGs and Deagles. Like, that's how ridiculous it's gotten.
With on the anti-ecos for them, I saw, I think it was Voldy made a tweet at the time of his anti-ecos being lost, and he was like, oh, I think it was something along like anti-eco setups can help. And like I resonate with that in the fact of, I would always try and come up with really good anti-eco setups that were focused on one area of the map, right? To make sure that we could lock that down, and then we all knew the protocols of what would happen if they took the other part of the map, or we knew how to deal with it. The thing with that is, just with how good a team like FaZe is, even if you have a setup, you're just going to get, Nico's just going to roll in the corner and just blow your fucking head off with a deagle. It doesn't even matter. It's just like, what the fuck do you do this then?
Yeah. No, well, the funny thing is, if you remember when Threat took over as the coach of NIP, this was one of the things that led to them winning Malmo. You know, they actually had really, really good discipline when they were on the anti-ecos. And one of the bizarre things about it is, because I went back and watched the games, and they weren't doing any revolutionary shit. It's not like they figured out some spot that no one else played on an area of a map, or that they had some like special like approach. It's almost like they just had a set of rules within the team as to what you do when you get the first kill, for example, and it's at a choke point, and how do you play from that. And this will sound like a counterintuitive point, but I actually feel like it was almost like the inverse of why teams like, I mean, funnily enough, G2 do it now, but the old LDLC used to be amazing on force buys, like very low econ force buys, but then be shit on actual gun rounds when they had some of the best players in the world. Like, it never made sense to me, because I'd be like, if you can be that good with the fucking CZ, how with real rifles don't you win the round? And what I realized when I went back in that scenario and looked at the old LDLC games was, it's because since they knew they didn't have good gun rounds, they just went super slow, basically, and tried to just like headshot people, basically, but like as in 1v1 duels, very slowly setting them up. Whereas when they had to go for the pistols or a low econ force spy, they just played like up tempo, dynamic, like 2 to 3 people, you rush in, obviously because you've just got a pistol, you don't fear for your life, so you just run past, so someone's playing like a bait strategy properly, you can trade onto a guy, you can get 3 people against 1 person with a gun and kill him. And the funny thing is, in that scenario, you want to just say to LDLC in that scenario, like, do some of this with guns and you'll be unstoppable, you know. Well, the inverse, okay, is a lot of these teams on the anti-ecos, the ones that do it correctly, everyone in the world, if you did give them like an exam on how to play Counter-Strike, would give the answers that would make you successful. Like, oh yeah, don't chase once you get the first kill. Like, never, if you're like low health, re-peek into like a choke where there's two people, you know, simple things. It's just that somehow in people's brains, when they know the enemy has the low weaponry, in their brain it's like they have that logic of like, it's okay to make a risky trade now and die because my team still has the better weapons, therefore I should win. And so people bizarrely just play like super risky against these fucking pistols. And yet logically, if you just played as though it was a real gun round, if you imagined that they had 5 AKs and you're the CTs, so when you kill the first guy, you don't just rush in there, or you don't take a risky peek, you know. You're like, right, even better. Now they have 4 people. Now we can hold all of our default spots still. Now we can wait still. You'd win so many rounds in theory. Like, is it? I realize that's very simplistic to say, and obviously you can't in the moment make yourself do that always. But there's something to it, right? I mean, that's why it should be possible to play versus ecos.
I think the best teams we see with ecos, and I think one of the reasons why NIP even had that run back then, is they were one of like the first teams who really started treating anti-ecos like full gun rounds. They were this is where we start getting into like the thing where it's almost like this weird scenario where it's like, thank God SMGs are powerful, because if you're going to buy Galils and AK-47s on anti-ecos, you're going to be light on nades. But if you're going to treat these like actual gun rounds, you need to be able to have nades, Molotovs for execution, flashbangs as well. So this is where now, I mean, you have like maybe 1 AK and an anti-eco, and then you have a bunch of UMPs, you have a MAC-10 to go in first to figure out where people are, but you have Molotovs to flush them out of position, you have smokes to set up the smoke wall. You just have to treat these anti-ecos like gun rounds now, and it's yeah, it comes down to the same theoretical Counter-Strike you have during gun rounds, is, you know, make sure you're trading properly, or don't overextend in this kind of a situation. Don't take the fight if you don't have to. This is a gun round. I'm still waiting for a team. We've been joking about this for years, and I feel like we're about to enter into that nightmare period where some team actually has the strategy of their entry fragger having a UMP, because it does give you bonus in terms of how you can move when you use the gun. So if the first guy going in has a UMP, gets the first kill, it's got armor pen as well. Like, you don't need 5 AK-47s perhaps. Are we actually going to see a team maybe try that? Or like, you know, the first guy goes in with a UMP, never stops running, he's just spraying, he gets the kill with a UMP, or maybe he doesn't, but he causes enough of a distraction. But it also helps your own economy because he's not spending as much money on an AK-47. He can be a little bit more mobile with it. And I think we're eventually...
I mean, I could see like G2 or VP doing that, and it'd be fucking devastating, right?
But we haven't. The weird thing is, like, we're almost at that point already, but not because it's an actual set tactic. It's just because there's a gun that's almost better than a rifle in certain situations at the $1,200 pay bracket. We have pistols that are $800, which are just as good as rifles in certain situations. So you like, teams just don't have to save anymore. We're at the point where ecos are like a thing of the past. Like, you rarely see after maybe the 3rd round, if a team loses pistol and second, they probably full eco in the 3rd. Sometimes teams don't even buy armor in the 2nd round, so they can have a deagle both 2nd and 3rd round and just see if some magic happens. But, you know, we're at the point now where we're just not going to see very many save rounds. It'll always be at least half buys.
I think with anti-ecos, like, different teams have different approaches. On the T side of Cache, something I remember like NIP doing a lot was when they would just go A main, you know, they'd wait in their default spots, and they'd maybe 30 seconds later all go A main. They'd Molotov the site completely, maybe one smoke, couple of flashes. Then everyone knew the lines they had to run so they could clear everything and trade correctly. And once you take the bomb site at that point, then you can just set up. You have the weapons. They have to come in close range. You assume you're going to take them down with those SMGs. They have pistols, but you have a lot more bullets, and hopefully you make the frags. But so to me, that almost seems like an all-in, right? So you wait, you default at the start, you wait to see if they do any risks. They don't do any risks, and then you hope in the transition period from your default positions to A main that they don't get any ideas to do like a mid-round push, right? That still seems like an all-in to me. Obviously, you have to make that at some point. So when we were at Renegades, obviously we're shit. But my approach was that we'd always do like an all-in. So we'd always do like a B execute or an A execute, or something where I knew that we had the utility advantage, and I knew that everybody their roles, right? There was no question. Like, it wasn't like we were all defaulting. If someone got picked, then I had to micromanage and tell everyone how to react. In an execute, it had been dry run. Everyone knew exactly what they had to do. So when you run the strat, even if you lose a frag, you instantly trade. Like, unless they do like a full fucking 5-man stack or a counter strat, they know it's coming. That's one way that you can obviously lose those situations, but you should be winning those like 9 out of 10 times. But the biggest problem with that is once a team knows you're doing that, and then I think this happens to NIP, right? I think that's why when they sit down and they have a boot camp and they come up with all these new strategies, you see them at 1 or 2 events be sick. But as soon as everyone goes, oh, okay, these guys are a threat ground now, we better study their strategies. And as soon as you know the telltale signs, you know what's coming, everybody is so quick to adapt nowadays. This is one of the first things I learned when we started playing like high-end Counter-Strike. In Australia, I could run the same execute 3 rounds in a row and get away with it. No one could do anything because it'd take them that long to adjust. Over here, you run it once, okay, you win. You want to run it again, or you want to even run a fake of it. They know it. They know how to react for the strat itself. They know how to react for the fake. They assume it could be a fake, and they fuck you up. And that's one of the things at this point where I think anti-ecos are always going to be where Valve wanted to be. And, you know, the potential, I think, what was it? Valve wanted it 4 or 5 to be 1 out of every 10. I think it's always going to be at that point because the CTs are taking...
Wait a minute, repeat that part again. I'm confused. What was the thing that Valve wanted?
Valve want ecos or force buys to be 1... 4 or 5 times out of 10.
Fucking hell, half the time they want people to win force buys. That's like... Is Gabe Newell just fucking... I mean, obviously it's not even Gabe Newell who does the game. I'm memeing myself now, but is Gabe Newell fucking happy or something? Whose logic is that?
So when I used to have discussions with them at
what
Majors,
the fuck?
I had plenty of time because we got knocked out early, but... when I would talk to them at Majors, I would discuss like why is a 5-7 like a 1 bullet kill close range and all that kind of, and they were like, well, we want these rounds to be potentially winnable, and I'm like, sure, that's fine, but at least reward teams for doing like making a correct gamble or having a really cool stack or doing like something interesting with nades. But instead, it's like if you get up close and you're able to shoot 20 bullet 5-7 and grab 2 headshots, your team is probably going to win that round, right? And they were like, oh, but in 1.6 in Source, how many do you think you're winning? I was like, fuck, maybe 1 out of 10? Like a full, like you had to eco, right?
Yeah.
Like 1.6, you weren't fucking force buying shit. So you may be winning 1 out of 10, and that's if you did the right stack or someone just like rolled down mid with a deagle and got a couple frags. And they're like, oh, but that's boring. Like, it's not boring to be rewarded for winning pistol. Or like that's why we all say it's one of the most important rounds in the game, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, don't get me started on Valve. I'll fucking have an aneurysm.
Well, it's gone the other way around, right? Because I can kind of understand the thought process where they want every round to be a danger. They want but it's gone the other way to where I almost feel like we're like. What the fuck, Matt Duncan, was that at StarLadder, that match where it was like the first 10 rounds were just traded back and forth?
Oh,
it was
FaZe
G2 versus G2.
FaZe. Yeah.
Like, that was the most fucking atrocious game of Counter-Strike I have ever watched.
Oh, it was terrible, wasn't it?
And it's gone the other way where, yes, sure, 3 to 4 out of 10, I can live with that. But it feels like now, and obviously I don't have the stats to back it up, but it feels like it's closer to like 6 or 7 out of 10 is one on the eco rounds. And then the real issue with it is, obviously the 1 bullet headshots of these pistols suck, or it's just kind of like that. That's super dangerous. That's a little bit overpowered for that kind of a thing. But it's a situation where anti-ecos are also tough because when you have rifles against pistols, the fights that the pistols want to take, the fights that rifles want to take are the fights that pistols thrive on, right? They have to find angles where they can be stationary and actually shoot. They can't just run and spray, whereas pistols is like you can just swing wide. You never have to stop moving and just, if 1 bullet is going to hit them at a certain range. So, that's the danger at the moment is that when you have a rifle, if you want to take a fight that's going to be good against the pistols, it almost feels like that's when you're just praying to the random gods. That's when you're just hoping that your spray randomly hits because you have to like find the duel, you have to stay a little stationary, have to tap, have to spray down, and then that just opens you up for so many other different scenarios. And it's just gotten ridiculous, and also it's not even like exciting to watch anymore because you just know it's going to happen. Like even as a viewer, like if I just take away all the Counter-Strike theory and knowledge, like
sure.
Yeah, if you want these rounds to be exciting, so viewers and fans can get engaged and be like, "Holy shit, they won a force buy. They only had 5 pistols." Well, it's no longer new anymore. It's not exciting. It happens 3 times a game.
Plus, here's a point actually that might seem a bit abstract because obviously no team actually constructs their lineup thinking about stuff like what the meta is and what pistols and no one actually thinks that way. In fact, it's actually one of the areas of Counter-Strike and esports that I think is actually way behind real sports when you consider how much money's coming in. People don't even recruit like. We're the best team on this map. We're going to lose this player. Let's at least get someone who can play this map. They don't even do that. Like, it's actually quite crazy how people recruit. But if you notice at the moment, it's like the worst time you could ever have all these mad force buys being overpowered when everyone's made fucking super teams of like the most stacked play. Like here's the thing, okay, yeah, we went mad about the G2 FaZe game because it was a fucking abomination for the whole series pretty much, but it was also the most ridiculous example because look at the fucking players in the game, you know, like everyone, like the worst player in the entire series is probably what, like Body, Carrigan, like, okay, Carrigan's not really like a star player type guy, sure, but like fucking hell, the amount of like superstar players in the game, then you give everyone OP pistols, you're gonna ruin the game. It's just gonna go bonkers, isn't it? And there's too many teams like that now.
That hits to the crux of the issue with Valve, right? Is we know they make their decisions based off like the matchmaking stats and the stats for the general community. So obviously, I mean, they haven't. I don't think
it's like I always say, Moses. I always say this line, right? If you watch a normal person play matchmaking with a Tech 9, it's not an overpowered weapon.
Right.
They don't do fucking anything with it. They don't get kills. They don't understand how to play as a team with the weapon. All the things that are OP about it are when you have it in the pro game. So unfortunately, if Valve sticks with the philosophy, which I agree with you, I think they do that, by the way. They do balance based on the public playing it, then they're never going to see these things as overpowered.
Yeah, no, they're not. I mean, that's the thing. That's why this problem, that's why it still persists. Obviously, if they're balancing based on the pro scene, it would be different. But this is also the reason why the R8 was so overpowered when the whole professional and competitive community laughed at it. Because if they'd kept the gun the way it was when it first came out, and you give professional players a month to start getting the timing of how the timing of when that shot loads up, you're just going to get a bunch of shoulder peaks that are just kills all day long. They won't even need to buy rifles. That would have been the most retarded gun in the game.
I'm almost sad there wasn't a tournament that had it like an actual LAN. I just for that, like watching the world burn, I'd just like to have just seen it once, and just seen some absolute bullshit.
Listen, if they put the Negev into something where it's like $2,000, I guarantee you some pro team is going to use it to just some fucking ridiculous effect, something that is just going to be unreal.
Fuck them.
Okay, Chad, are you actually someone who thinks that like, okay, whenever people say like the UMP's overpowered, blah blah blah, like one of the big problems I've noticed in every game which has like balancing is that unfortunately people go too far when they try to nerf shit as well. Like they want like every good fucking feature taken away from the thing, and then it's like, well, at that point no one will use it, So in what sense do you think, like what's the most primary way in which the UMP is overpowered, and what's like the most like small tweak you could make that'd bring it within control,
Something that I think would just impact the whole game as opposed to like rounds at a time would just be swap the kill reward of the UMP with an underused CT weapon of the FAMAS. Right?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah,
600 for a kill with the FAMAS, which nobody buys, and you get 300 for a UMP. So you can't fucking farm up an AWP in one round with a UMP because you got 3 or 4 kills, right? Like, remove that possibility. So that's because you already have a really good gun for potential force buy or an anti-eco, or it'll help bolster you on a normal rifle round, so you can get all the utility. You don't be rewarded as well by having a cheap gun that can do all that, and then you still get a massive kill reward, so you can keep getting extra gun rounds down the track. And I think that is just an easy one. And then the other one would just, I don't know, maybe the armor pen's a little bit too high, but at the same time, I have the internal argument with myself that fuck, the pistol armor is strong, so we do need something on the second round of the game to combat that, and the UMP appears to be that at the moment.
Because actually, I mean, if you've ever heard me give one of my rants about like a weapon that's overpowered, etc., I always use this same piece of logic, but it's one that people like Valve don't seem to get. What I essentially outlined before, which is that the way the game's played in casual is not... It doesn't take advantage of things that you can abuse that are OP about some of these weapons. It's actually a concept I've seen in every game. Like it's very prominent actually in MOBA games, believe it or not, because obviously in those games, it's not just a weapon. You play a particular hero or a champion or whatever. And the difference is you actually get examples in those games where something is OP as fuck. It's actually the case right now in League of Legends. The champion Ryze is like one of the best mid laners at the moment, and part of the reason is the utility he can give to his team, like the things he can do if you're in a real team. Now in solo queue, where people just play on their own in a team, and it's just like matchmaking, you get stacked together, it's got the lowest win rate of every champion, and that's because people who play just by themselves don't know how to. They can't transfer any of the utility in that sense. I realize it's a confusing term because in Counter-Strike we use it to mean like grenades and stuff, but they can't give any of the extra benefits that the champion has when it interacts with others to their team, and that's the big problem with all these OP weapons I've noticed in Counter-Strike. It's not like, I almost think that when Valve balances a gun, they get one guy and he stands still, and then the other guy stands still like 30 meters away in game, and they both fire the gun and try and kill each other, but without moving. And then it's like, okay, look, a Tech 9 is really bad. It's not a good gun, you know. And you're like, you're right, Valve guy. Like, you're totally right. The problem you haven't thought about, and I always say this about Tech 9, and I think it transfers to the UMP, is I'm not worried about a Tech 9 that's in that scenario fighting against a rifle. The rifle will win actually maybe 10 out of 10 times on that one. Like, it's so unlikely you're going to win with a Tech 9. But the difference is, a Tech 9 becomes a nightmare when I'm the guy with the rifle fighting another guy with a rifle. At the same time I'm doing that duel, someone's running constantly at me with a Tech 9. That's where it's now a nightmare. It only costs me $500 and it can do mad damage. That's the same with the UMP. The UMP is a gun that's literally just mobile the whole time. So you add that into a buy, because remember, it's not like people only buy UMPs or only buy pistols and UMP. No, they buy UMPs when they don't have enough for the AK, but they want all the nades. So it's the idea of what happens when you put a UMP with 2 AKs. That's where it's like, bizarrely, for the money, it's better than some of the rifles in that sense. You know, you have an added ability that you can't normally do. Like, no one runs with an AK and just sprays 30 bullets wildly. So for an entry frag, I think Jason's right. If some team figures this out, that if you had like the old death ball style that Happy used to run, right, where every T side is like you have 3 people who just attack one person basically. If one of those guys has a UMP, you can actually attack in a way more efficient manner almost. You know, he can just be running the whole time while the others take the normal duel.
Yeah, I just think like with the way that they make all these changes to guns and stuff, and then they don't look at like potentially reverting it back. Like there's like 3 blatantly obvious ones to me. So okay, they nerfed the CZ. Now I think it has a place. If you use it close range, you can potentially get multi kills with it. But I don't mind the ammo, because I think the way it's used is it's almost like a one and done gun, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or get a kill, get a gun, and get away. And I think that's cool. But the fact that the kill reward with it is still only $100. So I buy it on pistol round to play positions like drop in cobble or close inside on train, and I think it's really effective there. But a part of me thinks, why am I buying this weapon? Even if I get a kill or 2, I only get $100 per kill. That's one. Like, I think, why don't they just revert that? It's not going to affect the game in a negative way. It's actually going to balance it out, because this gun's already been nerfed. The kill reward is now just silly. Then you look at another one. Like, okay, they added the USP. I think probably 95% of players use the USP over the P2K, which is whatever. But why does it only have 24 reserve bullets? Yeah. Like, what the fuck is that about? Like it's not to the point. It's okay, sure, but you're not going to sit there and spam with that pistol anyway. I just don't. There's certain little things in the game that they're obviously not game breaking or anything like that, but it just shows that they're not trying to balance things equally. Obviously, don't want everything to be equal, but it just doesn't make sense to me, and then it boggles the mind a little bit.
Here's my big worry is like even outside of all the issues with the guns, like I have plenty of issues with them and I'll ignore it. My biggest fear is the economy, because once the economy is not like an interesting facet to this game, once the economy isn't having an impact on how the game is played, really, you know, when we have every single round is a danger to be won or lost, no matter how much you have invested into the round. The economy is the game that is like defined Counter-Strike as a franchise. Like the meme is always like, oh, we're COD now. Well, when the economy goes away, we will literally be COD.
Yep.
And what is there to differentiate Counter-Strike from any other shit FPS game at that point?
Well, especially because the key thing is the economy is, it's not just something that, like, you know, there's a flow chart to, like, right, we've lost this round, so you have to do this on the next one. The whole point is it ties into who you are as a team. Like, if you are Virtus Pro and you really feel like, oh, we've got him on the ropes right now, like we can just break him at this moment, you don't save up and then wait till I have a full gun round with all utility, etc. You do like a low econ buy, and you give the right player the AK, you know, and you rush in. If you are, I mean, funnily enough, we've seen North do this recently. Sometimes they really did think, oh, our gun rounds are going to win the whole game. So you know what, we will just actually save out, we'll wait fully for it. So what I like is that it's another area where there's options and you can express your creativity or what you want to do as a team, and you can kind of show your philosophy on the game. The big problem always becomes, this is what my problem used to be with the OP Tech 9 when they had it back at, like, you know, March 2015, when all of us was getting more, best player in the world had more kills with a fucking Tech 9 than an AK on T side. Like, the big problem I had in that scenario was there was like almost never a bad time to buy one. Like, this is another balanced concept I've noticed in games. If there's ever a unit in like an RTS game that you're never punished for building, you've fucked the game at that point in time, because there's no strategy, you know, like you just always do it and you get some benefit out of it. So in the same sense, especially if people win so many of them now, like say the Valve gets it to where they say like 5 out of 10 or whatever times you'd win a force buy. it's not a gamble at that point in time. Like, actually, depending on what the opponent's status is, that might even be sometimes the correct choice, just like objectively, you know, which it should. The whole point is it should be a gamble, you know. If the key point I'm making is if you do it and it's wrong, you should be fucked, you know. If you pull it off, great, you get a mad reward, you get back in the game earlier than they should. But that's the problem at the moment, it doesn't feel like a gamble.
Yeah, it's the thing which I can't wrap my head around is we have to double eco, so let's force buy anyway. That just fucking blows
it's mad,
my
isn't it?
mind. Like,
so mad.
We don't have any money, but if we buy now, we'll have enough in a couple rounds' time anyway, so fuck this.
You can tell the game was made by Americans, of course. Like, Valve, literally, obviously, every Valve employee, as his credit cards is jacked up, he's taking, like, high-interest loans, you know, like payday loans. Like, well, I owe a lot of money, so I have to get even more in debt right now today to pay off the first payment. It's like, where's this all going to end? Like, did you ever see 2008? There was an economy, and then there wasn't anymore. Like, what fucking logic is that? I agree. Like, here's the problem: is that so that series we referred to before, the G2 versus FaZe one, it was even more ridiculous because obviously we'll get to G2 in a minute. But it was even more ridiculous in as much as it felt like G2 never won fucking gun rounds. They only won the 4 spies, and yet they got to the 3rd map and lost 16-10. Right? That is an abomination. Like, in that game, when they take those gambles, listen, if they really do have some of the best players, obviously they have a wicked lineup, right? Okay, I'll give them some of those rounds. Some of them, they might have played them very intelligently, or a player just went off, okay? They can have those ones. But when you do as many 4 spies as they did, and just play some of them in an average manner, that should literally snowball the whole game to your opponent. You should have lost the map, like, you know, 16-4 and just completely shit the bed. And afterwards, you should all be sitting around going, like, this can't be our approach, you know. We have to have, like, a proper system. We have to only do it at certain times. Whereas their logic was, like, it's like that fucking thing. Okay, here's the analogy for you, okay, Moses. Valve have turned all of us into experimental laboratory crack rats. You know, you always hear those stories where it's like, if you give rats a choice between water and a button that dispenses crack or sugar or whatever, the story is always the same, isn't it? It's always like, the rat died of dehydration after pressing the button 7,000 times in a minute. Like, fucking hell. That's what they've turned us into with 4 spies. It's like, everyone's like, right, we don't have any money. 4 spy. What, you didn't hear me out. Like, we've got to have a tactic. 4 spy. Right? Well, no, but what if we lose a round? Well, then we'll 4 spy. It's like, what is this? Is this some sort of mad practical joke?
Dude, this is why it's so hard to be so critical and speak out against it, is because, one, we say that game is an abomination, yet that kind of buying tactics gets teams to a 3rd map with a chance to win the series. 2, even if you're a caster and saying it live without the benefit of 2020 on the whole series, and you're like, oh yeah, I really don't like this buy. Like, they're really, you know, putting their economy in a very scary position, and, you know, so, you know, if they don't win this, blah blah blah, and then they go out and just wipe the other team out with 5 players alive from hitting Tech 9 and Deagle headshots across the map, and then all of a sudden they've picked up all the guns. So not only do you get the kill, not only do you win the round, but also on top of your $600 bonus or $300
exactly,
bonus, you have a free $3,100 gun. So all of a sudden you gain even more money in that sense. So and then it's just like, well, yeah, I guess, you know, that maybe that was the right call. It's just like you don't even know what's right or wrong anymore in terms of theory at this point, because it's so hard, even especially as a player. It's like I feel for them in one sense, because when I look at some of the buys like what, I'm like, this is shit. Why are they doing this? And still they have to look at, like, despite what they might think of their own knowledge of Counter-Strike theory, they have to look and say, yeah, but we've won 3 out of 4 spies in this match. Like, why wouldn't we go for another one?
But to try and justify that a little bit more, I remember, like, playing against certain teams and talking to different in-game leaders and stuff, and it was like, if you start a game off and you're potentially down, you lose, and you did, like, the normal ecos and you're saving up for the first gun round and shit, and then you get to the first gun round and you lose that, okay, so now you're already 5 rounds in the hole if you're playing Counter-Strike, you know, the way that we all, the purest way. And certain teams and in-game leaders and stuff were like, to get confidence behind my players, we will force buy to be competitive, right? Because those rounds are 90% of the time a competitive close round. It's hardly ever a shutout. People are always getting entry frags and stuff.
Sure.
And maybe there's teams who are like slow starters. I don't know, you know, all the mentality that goes behind it. But maybe force buys help them get into the game earlier, you know. And
well, I think the other hard part about it is you're also riding the fine line where if you don't invest in the 2nd round, if you don't force buy there, and you don't invest in maybe, you know, the 5th round with some kind of pistol armor, and then all of a sudden you have an opponent that's using UMPs and you going against unarmored opponents, and they're getting $600 kill bonuses every round, and you're not able to force them into any rebuys, then all of a sudden not only are you down 5-0, but your opponents all have $12,000, and then it's just like, oh, all right, well, we're fucked. fucked for the rest of the half. So they're almost in a system where they have to force buy, right? Because you have to keep the money low, especially if you're not losing the round. So it's just like this. It's just this ridiculous brain dead scenario.
Oh, that's actually one of the things that I've never understood. Like, one thing I've never been able to relate to Valve on is the kill reward changes. Because obviously in 1.6, for anyone who doesn't know, the kill reward for every gun is identical. It's $300 for every single weapon. Yep. So it's like there's a very, that's why there is like a flowchart in 1.6 as to this is a gamble, this is a safe buy, this is how you eco, this is how you eco to get a specific weapon. Like, for example, we all know like how many, if you have to get the bomb down, or how many kills you have to get if you're the AWPer to get your AWP on the third round. You know, like everyone, it was all figured out like mathematically. And then it's not like that made the game boring. It just gave it kind of like a structure where you knew when people were deviating, and there was a logic to, you could kind of grade how well someone played around because you knew what they were ideally going to do or what was a gamble. Now, one of the things I've never understood about the kill reward part is that one of the sets of weapons that they gave the kill rewards to was the SMGs. It's like, what was your logic there? Like, I know, I can already tell you, unfortunately, that their logic was, this will mean someone might use it against an AK. Like, no, because when do people use SMGs? Against fucking ecos. Yeah. So actually, you're giving me more money for getting the easiest kills in the game. Whose idea is that? Remember, economy is an important thing. Yeah. Like, what the fuck even is that? What is the logic? It just confuses me.
Yeah, but I mean, you'll remember this, Duncan, is they've always had a history of not understanding how to manage Counter-Strike economy, because this is where we get to have the fun throwback to the source days. When they changed the economy so that the guns that
economy, right?
The guns that were purchased more often were more expensive. So you started
became like 16K or some shit.
Yeah, it basically became the equivalent of that thing where, you know, just before World War II, before the Nazis took over, there was this thing called the Weimar Republic in Germany. And then what happened was, right, they did I mean, there was a lot of problems, obviously, because of like the First World War, they had like treaty sanctions put on them, and they basically, the economic floor just fell out, right? And famously, there's all these like pictures where, you know, you had to take like a wheelbarrow full of like German marks, which is their currency, to go and fucking get, you know, a loaf of bread. That's like what that dynamic economy thing became in Source. It was so like ridiculous. You must spend all of your money for a deagle. It's like, what the fuck is that? It's like, what even is basically all I need is every time Valve's coming up with a when they're having like a think tank meeting, you know, about economy, I just need Sadikis there like, what in God's name is that in the economy? And then they'd be like, oh yeah, the economy, shit, I forgot. It's not just one round, is it? It's a multiple rounds. Yeah, maybe I've cracked it actually, Moses. I've figured it out. They don't have a lot of time because they do a lot of programming over at Valve. They obviously just DM, don't they? They don't actually play rounds. There's no economy. They just play gun game and DM. That's what they do, and they balance the game based on that. It's the only logical conclusion. Aside from that, they all just hate us and don't want there to be nice things. You know?
Yeah, this is why we can't have nice things.
Oh, I've got a question I wanted to go back to actually. So even though Moses popped it in there as a cheeky remark, it's true, you are one of the people, Sponge, who is an apologist for Cobblestone. You legit think it's a good map still, like it should be in the map pool. Now, I want to know this, okay, because I know there's a couple of people. I know Heroic, Snappy thinks it's a good map as well. Give me your best case. Why is Cobblestone a good map? Because I know a lot of people have pretty much gone off that map in the last sort of 8 months, you know.
I think the T side, it lends itself to being very thorough and methodical. I also think you have a good chance to take a lot of risks. I know that just contradicts what I just said, but I used to like how much you could mix up your game style on the T side. You could do like a mid-rush and win the round, or you could do like a full NIP, jump, smoke, B execute, and you could pace the game off of so many different strategies. And I like the way that, for me anyway, because our team wasn't very good in the mid rounds, I felt that it's almost all in. You know, you can take control of like A corridors and mid, and then go back to B and that kind of stuff. But it's easy, right? There's not too much risk when you do that kind of stuff compared to other maps. You take mid on Mirage, the CTs can pick out any time and just fist the shit out of you. Whereas a map like Cobble, I quite like the fact that once you've done the hard work of taking an area, the risk is quite low, and then it sets you up for a lot of the CTs take gambles at that point. And that's another side of Counter-Strike that I quite like, is that the CTs have to also be very productive. You know, they have to take risks, they have to take territory, and we know how difficult it is to do. And it means that instead of just picking out and taking a duel, you need a pop flash from a teammate. It forces people to play Counter-Strike the way that I like it to be played, with teamwork, and there's a reason behind people doing things, and there's, you know, everybody's on the same page on that map. The whole CT side needs to be a link. You can't just be one guy over here and one guy over here. Everyone matters to everyone. Once drop's taken, you know, how are you going to approach the situation as the CTs? Are we going to retake it? Are we going to let them have it? Kill them when they come out? Like, I just think as a map, for me anyway, the way that it was, I liked calling on it, and I liked the way that it played out. I can see now, you know, how teams don't like it because maybe that's too much for some people, you know?
Okay. So Moses, where are you on the spectrum? Obviously referring to this map.
Yeah.
And
way to one end.
Whereabouts are you on this one? What's your take on Cobble?
I just find it boring. I think at the moment, and I mean, there's some truth to what Chad said, but I think also, I mean, the big thing is obviously the aggression comes from like one half of the map. I don't think there's a lot of good ways outside of like peering over the smoke and mid for a pick, other than peeking halls or peeking deep into the B tunnels or a boost. There's not a whole lot of things that promote CT aggression, and in that sense, you just see very static setups far back. I think most of the time, especially if there's a full economy, the terrorist team is just like, all right, let's wait for the smokes to go away on B platform, and I think part of the reason for that is there are actually, like Chad said, you can take risks and you can do things on the CT side, but it does take, you know, pop flash. It takes utility. So I think most teams have gotten to the point where they just say it's not worth the risk. It's not worth overextending for this kind of a play. Like, you know, why not just play back? Why not, you know, just see if the terrorists are going to execute through our smokes, and we'll just pick them off and run them down. And I think we get to a point at times, unless like the economies are just in tatters, I think the full gun rounds are just essentially like wait for smokes to subside, just sit around for a minute. There's not going to be any CT pushes, you know, make some noise over towards A halls. I think the only thing they can really do is push back and get control of A halls and make sure there's no defense really far pushed up. And then it's just kind of, you know, blow your load on an execute. Just throw everything over the wall, all the smokes, all the flashbangs. Yeah, obviously there's some cool designed ones, but and then just hit the bomb site and see what happens. I don't think there's a whole lot of excitement. I prefer maps like, and this is also going to be interesting because it's actually not that exciting of a map right now. I like maps like Cache, where CTs have to be aggressive and have to be very mobile and have to be dynamic. Now, the unfortunate part of that is because it is a little bit tricky, we don't see any teams who are that good on it anymore, on either side of the map, really. So it just ends up being a very snowballed map, where, you know, if you just go on a losing streak, there's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of good ways to set your feet and kind of reestablish the economy. So I think that we see like wider margins of halves. But I think Cache is one of the more exciting maps that we could see played. I think Dust 2 is similar in that sense as well. I know a lot of people found Dust 2 boring, but I think when that comes back, that'll be fun. But yeah, Cobble to me is just kind of like just a little bit of a drag when I watch it.
The problem is, like, it's one of those maps where I can absolutely appreciate the teams that were very good on it. Like, if you ever look who had amazing T-sides on Cobble, it's no coincidence those are like the best teams, you know, in the fucking world. Or like, it's very rare that you had like middling teams that had a decent Cobblestone. Obviously, people now will expect me to put in some sort of obvious joke about Renegades was alright on the map, though. But actually, I hadn't even been thinking of that. That just came to me now. It's almost like I have an audience in my own brain. So I have a Twitch chat in my brain that just suggests stupid shit. And I'm like, shut up! I'm trying to talk. So I've turned Twitch chat off now, Moses. Back to my point. Yeah, that's one of the problems I have with it, is that it's like a map where I can absolutely appreciate technically what people do when they have a great strat. And like one of the things I used to love about that Na'Vi team when they were in their prime in early 2016 was like the methodical nature to how they did it. It's like you could exactly see what they meant to do, and if they executed it properly, and if they made the right read, and how they'd set it all up piece by piece. And so when you can do that, it's fantastic, like, to appreciate, but I can't really say that watching it was that much fun, because it was incredibly slow. It was methodical in a way that like didn't leave, like, I always felt like the problem in that era, I know Snappy from Heroic says that the map is becoming more CT sided and that he thinks there's a lot of fixes you can do now, but I actually hate any map pretty much where the defense just generally plays static and is just reactive. Like, they don't know what they're going to do until they see a particular flash or a guy run in, basically. And in general, that's just there's not as much fun. Like, for example, my favorite map at the moment is Overpass, and one of the main reasons why is because both teams the CTs and the Ts have to constantly be making decisions and probing for info and then making reads off that. It's like you no, even if you get early info, that doesn't last you the rest of the round. That's like the next 15 seconds, you know. It's like I just love the like dynamic of it, and so as a result, even when I'm watching the best teams play, I never quite know yet how's this round going to tilt. You know, which site are they going to even hit? How many CTs will there be there? Like I feel like it's a really alive map. You know, there's a lot of intelligent stuff you can do there.
Yeah, I think Overpass is probably it's easily the best map that Valve like just manufactured out of nowhere, like purely Valve map. I think the changes they made would have been great, and also I think it even tops most of the remakes that came out. Train's pretty cool as well, but Overpass, like one of the more tactical maps we have. I think the compelling part about that map is the important like the biggest like impact portion of the map like is away from the bomb sites. It's like bathrooms and it's stairs, right? Like you actually have to fight for ground that's not a bomb site. You know, there's a similar case to that in Train, but I mean it leads directly into the bomb site, you know, that outside train yard. But an Overpass, it just seems it's such a cool map because there's so many different points for aggression on the CT side. You have to be very tactical on the T side, but you can also switch things up and just go for like a fast B play. I mean, it lends itself to so many different kinds of play styles. And now that teams are actually like really, really good on it as well, it's very similar to Cash in my opinion in that sense, where you can have different play styles and be very, very good on it. But we actually have teams that are like masters of Overpass or that have been masters of Overpass in the past 6 months that make it fun to watch.
I think to build on that, I've been obviously with the Pro League and stuff, been watching a lot of Na'Vi, and like I could see that they're on an upward trajectory when StarX stepped down when it was removed as coach or whatever happened there, because their CT sides became a lot more proactive across all maps. I think all CT sides on every map should be like a transitional dynamic defense, right? Yeah. I think like you can take information without risking your life and then fall back to the next, and fall back to the next, and fall back to the next. Sure. But what I noticed really good with the new look Na'Vi is how proactive they are at the start of the rounds. Like you're talking about, they do that smoke and they push up and they have like the C's flashing for simple and pushing up those stairs and taking full control of playground. And when I see them playing like that, that's like, it's a really positive sign. And I think that's the same as what Jason was saying about Cache, is you need to be proactive on the CT side to get a bit of ground, either to force the rotation that you want to happen, or to find a kill to give yourself an advantage and then drop back and play a 4v5 situation. And that's why maybe those maps are more exciting, because they require maybe not a risk, but it has to be a calculated, dry run, practiced, well-drilled risk that is always changing. Different teams approach situations in different manners, and that's an exciting thing to me to see.
Okay, so let's talk about Na'Vi then, because obviously they're a team that made top 4 here. I mean, unfortunately, they ran into Astralis again, who, that's just their nemesis at the moment. They don't beat those guys. Now, one of the interesting things is on this topic of the new coach, like, obviously, after one LAN, it's hard to say what he changed, like, very precisely, but it's clear you can use some broad strokes there. He clearly did change some things. Like, as you're saying, the CT sides looked a lot better. I mean, Guardian is just, like, resurrected somehow, Guardian and Simple both at the same time are playing together. These are all things we just haven't really seen in that lineup before, because they've had the lineup for a long time now. People don't realize it was, like, late summer last year when they made the move. So this is a long time this lineup's been together, and they hadn't really gotten that potential out. Now, the funny thing is, when you talk about that coach, like, I don't think there's anyone who thinks StarX was a bad coach, because the shit he did on T-side in the old line, it was incredible. But I almost feel like it's funny, if you think back to that old Na'Vi, they almost used their T-side as a crutch. They actually had pretty shit CT halves, They would have to win like 10 rounds on T-side of Cobble to have a chance to win the map, Or on Train, they'd have to get double digits, And so I almost wonder in Counter-Strike if that's something, if one day, if enough money comes in, where it'll be like American football, Moses, and you'll have like the defensive coach and the offensive coach. Because obviously StarX, for whatever reason, never really had like a good setup on the CT side, but he had an amazing T-side, but his logic was almost just like, right, the T-side has to be even better then, or something bizarre. What do you think of the new Na'Vi in the new coach?
I like Andy a lot, but I mean mostly I'm a little bit biased, because not biased, but like what I've been saying is always
definitely not biased, never biased.
Well, no, but I've always said
got him on camera, guys. Get that clip, put it up.
Biased.
I'm biased. No, definitely not biased.
No, but he, like, when I said, like, over the past like 3 months, or ever since probably the major, is like their CT sides are shit. Or I think since Oakland, actually, their CT sides were just dog shit, and then they just seem to have like a lack of communication. And I just met Andy and Starladder and had a conversation with him one morning over breakfast, and like the thing he said was like, the CT sides need to be fixed. We have no idea how to rotate. There's massive amounts of miscommunications going on. They don't know how to handle any kind of situation, and because they have no idea where to go and what's going on, they're giving up so much ground that just makes it even worse. So I mean, he basically just kind of reiterated everything that I thought about their CT sides, which made me feel good. But I think on top of that, I mean, their T sides even are looking better, which is the surprising things than they had, towards the latter end of StarX. Yeah. And also, they're just exciting to watch. I mean, Guardian and Simple are obviously two of the most exciting and skilled players we have, but with their CT sides, one of the things Andy told me is he's like, I'm not a guy who likes to just like sit back and be passive, no matter like whether it's CT or T side. So his entire concept is, they've obviously included like some of the thoughts on how to play offensive, like being aggressive on certain portions of the map into their defense. This is where on Overpass especially, we see, Na'Vi frequently pushing up long, pushing up bathrooms towards Fountain, having those deep smokes, being aggressive, taking a fight almost at the playground, at that fountain, and just seeing what happens, and from there being able to rotate and being able to coordinate it, catching a lot of teams off. And that's just a very fun play style to watch when you see teams on CT side actually doing that. And because they have the skill to back it up, it can be so deadly. I think this team is going to be very, very interesting to watch over the next 3 months. I think they're going to improve it to a decent degree, especially if Simple and Guardian keep the form they're in. This team is going to be so dangerous in this middle, like going into the next major.
Okay, what do you think of Na'Vi at the moment, Chad?
Yeah, I'm very positive about them. I wasn't like on the hype train at the major that they were going to like go super deep, but I thought that they were going to be like a threat. They obviously had that good group stage, and like, I guess, like you're saying, Astralis is the nemesis for them at the moment. But now that they're a bit more proactive, I think we can see those matchups probably getting a lot closer, because I think their issue before, like Jason was saying, was if they're just passive on the CT side, if you're letting a team like Astralis just constantly execute on you, like, you're going to have a really fucking rough day. Like, okay, sure, you might be able to sit there and win a couple of rounds by someone getting a few multi-kills or having a good retake and winning a clutch. But if a team constantly grinds out, executes on you, there's nothing like worse than actually going up against that. It becomes like miserable to play against. So now that they are being more proactive on the CT side, I think that's a positive thing. But to touch on what you're talking about with the coaching thing about having, potentially having like an offensive and defensive coach, like I'm surprised that more teams don't have people coming in to coach on different elements, or even just having like have a coach come in for like a couple of weeks to fix, like say if a team, like it'd have to, English speaking teams would be the scenario I'm looking at now. But say you had a team you had someone come in and they just sat there and listened to the team's communication for 2 weeks, and you fixed it, and any issues that he saw, he fixed that over a 2 week period, and then that coach can fuck off. It's just a temporary thing. Or you have someone come in and just go, all right, I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of set executes for you guys, give you the executes, you can use them, whatever, you don't have to. He fucks off, and I think that's something that we hopefully get to see in Counter-Strike soon, because I think one coach can get a little bit stale. You need to have more ideas, because Counter-Strike is constantly evolving.
Yeah, I think also, I think we'll eventually get to that point. I think it's just too early for it. I mean, you look at all the teams that have, wanted coaches, and there's just no one. Like there's no names, right? There's no names that leap off the page outside of maybe StarX, who's not signed, and maybe Peacemaker. But I mean, those are the only guys with any kind of coaching experience. But outside of that, I mean, Andy, who's proving himself to look like a good coach initially, is one of their analysts, who's someone they just had like watching demos for him. And I think that kind of infrastructure, if Counter-Strike keeps growing, is going to come very, very quickly. But I mean, some teams don't even have one coach, much less have one for offense, or one for the T sides, one for the CT sides. I'm surprised more teams don't just have like some fucking nerd that just sits in a basement and watches demos and says, you're like, yeah, we have these teams in a group stage in 2 weeks, and then just says, okay, so this team 90% of the times player X plays, Ali from this kind of a situation. This is how he plays it, like 90% of the times. If he throws this flashbang, this is what he does after. He's going to want to flash, and 60% of the times they lean towards the B bomb site, or on the T sides they like to plant at the A bomb site. And if they throw this smoke, 80% of the times this strategy is coming. I'm surprised we haven't heard more of that. In the organization that, I don't think this is any kind of coincidence, that seems to be leading the way and having a proper infrastructure behind a team to make them do better is Astralis. And we talk all about how good they look in-game, but probably their biggest contribution, their biggest impact on the scene is I think we're going to see more teams and more organizations start picking up, stats guys like an Astralis has, or guys with those kinds of ideas with the sports psychologists. We've seen plenty of players speak out to the benefit of that, Get Right being notable among them. But you're going to start seeing a bigger infrastructure come from around teams that allows them to actually compete at a professional level, making professional decisions, not going to ESL 1 Cologne when the major is in 2 weeks. I think that's kind of the level that we're going to start heading to.
I mean, I definitely agree in as much as like one of the areas that teams are lacking by not having the analyst is they're not getting a proper scouting report. Like teams, it's amazing this still happens when you consider the money in CSGO now. There's so many teams that still, their preparation is what it was in 1.6, which is you have, like think of the best teams, okay? Usually you have a very good in-game leader. Like at the moment, a lot of the in-game leaders have risen to the top, they're in the best teams. So what you do is you take a guy who essentially has a great mind for the game, and you basically tell him, cram for this test. Like you can't study, you can't prepare, you can't figure out all the things. You have like a day, just do as much as you can. And listen, some of those guys are so brilliant, they can come up with something, they can come up with some basic shit. But instead, if you had that guy and you were like, essentially, here's someone who's going to tutor you on all the things these teams do, and then that guy with the super brain is going to make the choices, the guy's going to fucking ace it, Think about how well prepared some of these guys would be. But that's an area in Counter-Strike where I realize we've had a lot of LANs, and so people can't do it themselves. That's why you need the analyst guy who just sat at home doing it. In fact, remote is probably ideal. Have him just send in an email before the game or whatever. Like it is an area that, I mean, you're in game leader chat. That's a pretty obvious upgrade. Like there's almost no downside to it, right? I mean, if you didn't like the stuff he sends in, you just ignore it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure G2 have that, right, with NK. So they've got Smiths as like the coach, and then NK I think is like doing the analytical side of things. Like he's watching all the demos, he's getting all that stuff. To have that would be huge. I think the biggest issue for me as an in-game leader, like dealing with players, and this is where like as Renegades, I would have loved some kind of fucking support to help me take over the, like not in terms of coaching, that would have been fine too, but just any crutch. Is how you give that information to your players. Do you just give them a strategy, knowing what it's going to counter strat, right? Or do you tell them exactly what the other team is going to do, put all that shit in their head? And then I had this problem with like we counter strat a Gambit on train, and we knew like how I wanted everybody to kind of like research on their own a little bit, find out how the people play the positions that they're going to be coming up against, and just so it's in the back of their head, oh, if I see this is a probability. But what ended up happening was they saw this demo, or saw a couple of demos, and thought so hard that, oh, this is 100% going to happen. So they were ready for only like that situation to happen. And then as soon as it didn't happen, it was in their head and they were completely out of the game for the whole thing. I was like, this is fucking retarded. So I think the biggest thing is, I think
Chad, it didn't happen, mate. It's fucked. We're all fucked, aren't we? No, just keep playing Counter-Strike though. But they didn't come, Chad. What about the demo? Like, fuck, please.
I think I'm 100% with you what you're saying. It makes so much sense. Every team should have an analyst, right? It's just, I think how you deliver that to the team is the most important part.
I think that's the trick, right? Because of the massive schedule that we have, in terms of, are you going to do it for online games as well? Are you going to do it for the 3 different LAN tournaments you have? I think ideally it would be a situation where maybe you have like 1 BO3 per week and you can specifically prepare for that opponent. I think that'd be really, really cool to watch. But I think more what could be useful is the things like what are the big ones? Shadow.gg, and there's that other one that's around, like those websites.
Demo passes, yeah.
But I mean, regardless of what it is, I think more of what we'll see is something like that, is being able to watch that and say, what is the percentage? How does a team rotate after they lose this specific player? Like, how if Astralis loses device on the CT side over at long A, what is the adjustment in their defense to cover up for what he was doing? Do they have any trends in how they rotate based off which player is lost or where on the map they lose a player? Do they have any trends on the T side if one of their players gets picked off of where they end up hitting? Because I think Sean was the one who pointed out in a broadcast at some point where it was like, if NIP lose a player and they're in a 4-on-5, like they do like a mid to B split on Dust 2 more often than not, something like that. And then I think you start making sure that your players are prepared for those kinds of things. Or maybe it's just the in-game leader. Maybe the in-game leader just has to have that knowledge, and then he knows what to call from there because he knows where the rotations are going to go. So it's that kind of situation. But I mean, think of it this way. We're not even at the situation where every player on a team knows every single smoke on a map. Most teams still have the situation where your player knows the one smoke that he needs to know for strat A, the one smoke he needs to know for strat B, and the one smoke he needs to know for strat C. So if you're an in-game leader and you need to adjust in the mid-round, and you say, hey, we need to have an arch side smoke right now, and you just have some little fucking brick who's just like, oh man, I only know the fucking truck smoke. Yep. And you're like, well shit, we're not, like, what the fuck?
I mean, here's an example, right? That is a perfect like opening where I can basically give you an example of someone who's the opposite of that, which is that, I'm not joking, if you go and talk to Neo about the maps that VP plays and ask him about smokes and flashes, like, he's one of those guys. NBK used to be like this as well, where they just know every fucking smoke of that. It's not like they just have the ones they invented and they did. They literally, like, I'd love to see, I wish there was like a separate stat, right, that was like how many hours in game but not actually playing a match, you know? Because someone like Neo, remember, yeah, he has to be the in-game leader at times, but I'd love to know how many fucking hours these guys have spent going over that. And the whole point is, like, Neo's never going to be a star player again. Like, that ship's kind of sailed, you know? But one of the ways he can always remain, like, impactful and a vital member of his team is, guess what? Pasha probably doesn't know any of the smokes. But he doesn't have to. He's got Neo. Neo knows them all and will be the guy who does that and then figures out the new smokes and what the meta of the smokes is. And that's probably the most underrated element of CSGO, is that it's when you play these maps, we talk as though you're playing the same map again. Like, right, just reset. You're going to play this map 10 times in the next few weeks. Well, you know, every time you play the map is different, isn't it? Because the opponent's played you and then they've watched you play. And so it's obviously, you know, there's a dance going on. You're constantly changing things up. So if you have the players who constantly stay up to date with the smokes and come up with new ones and don't just stick with the one that works for them, that's like a very, very tiny edge that won't decide the whole game, but it, like, add enough of those little tiny edges up and you are going to have a better team and more consistency, and you're gonna be a team that, like VP, can get back to the top again, you know.
I think a team like SK is a good example of one who, like, to build off Jason's point about they all know the importance of knowing all the roles, or, you know, having enough smokes in their utility they can fill the gaps that Fallen needs them to on the fly. And that's something which I find it interesting, you know, that they've now taken the mentality of, we're not preparing for other teams, we're just focusing on our own I don't know how true that could be. Like, you have to prepare a little bit, or you must play the teams enough to know that you have to approach a situation differently. You can't just be so strong-headed and brute force your way in all the time. You have to kind of make sure you can, like, there's one thing to wanting to be the pace setter, right? You might want to do a fast strategy. You might want to do something a bit off the cuff to catch a team off guard, and then you can kind of play with that mind game for the rest of the half. But you need your players to kind of know a few tendencies, right? Like, you need to know, okay, well, they really like to do like a mid control, or if they get the plant on the pistol round, they're always going to eco and buy on the third, right? Like, those little things are very important to know, so you can structure the game around that. Whereas it was an interview, or I was reading something somewhere where I think they're saying that they're not really focusing on their opponents as much, more on themselves, which I thought was interesting.
I mean, this even goes back to the coaching thing. I mean, I think one of the areas that would be, I don't know if we'll ever get here, but it would be interesting, is like, yeah, you guys talked about the offensive and defensive coaches, but I mean, one thing we have in the NFL that seems pretty insane, but, you know, with the amount of preparation that goes in, you know, there's the offensive line coach, there's the wide receiver coach, there's the, you know,
position coaches, basically.
Yeah. So what if in like, let's say 2 years, Guardian decides he just doesn't want to play anymore, doesn't want the stress, maybe he's just not as good, maybe he's just dropped off and he's kind of done with it. How beneficial would it be to have like an op coach? What if you have Guardian behind your current up and coming opper every single match in preparation, and Guardian's the one watching his opponent's tendencies, and Guardian's the one that comes in and it says, you know, if I'm in this game, this is what I do. You know, he's going to peak here at some point, so be patient, don't unscope, be very careful. Like, you know, this is the angles he likes to hold when he's approaching the A bomb site. This is where he's vulnerable from when he's doing that. So find this timing. You know, what if we get into that, or like you know, maybe Dupree becomes an entry fragger coach. You know, this is the kind of mindset you have to have. This is the kind of preparation you have to have. Oh, you're having trouble, you know, getting an entry frag. You know, maybe try dropping your sensitivity so you can be a little bit, or maybe raise your sensitivity so you can clear all the corners. Whatever it might be, things of that nature, like different things that, you know, different ideas that they've all gone through. I think that'd be very, very unique to see going forward. I mean, obviously, Counter-Strike needs to last long enough, and there needs to be enough money to pay those guys an actual salary to do that position, which is always going to be the issue. But
maybe in G2, if it doesn't work out for Smiths, he could become like a whiffing coach, and he could be like, you see, the problem is here, it's too fluid. You got to get kind of like a hitch in your AWPing style, you know, and also like, you know, you got to get people to just save you the gun, and then you don't even get a kill. You just hide and spawn. Like, you know, there's a lot of impact here. I'm seeing this is a mess, quite frankly. I'm gonna have to start over and destroy your game piece by piece. Like, okay, so no, anyway. After that humorous interlude, Moses, I now have a question. Okay, do you have something else to conclude with?
I was going to ask Chad a question. So
oh, right, yeah, go on then, jump in.
Well, I mean, this could be fun because I know Duncan and I have had plenty of conversations on this one, and I know we got into it on the desk in Star Ladder with Yanko as well. Where do you stand, Chad? And no hints, Duncan. Chad, where do you stand on the idea of the support role in Counter-Strike?
It doesn't exist.
Thank fucking God. A man who knows what he's talking about, finally. Jesus Christ.
Wait. Now we need to unpack that. What does that mean, it doesn't exist?
There's no player specifically in the game just to support other players with flashes and nades. He has to have a role beyond that.
Right, see, this is the part I don't get. I don't know what Yanko... Here, the problem with this is I'm not sure what Yanko's position is, Moses, so I can't state his. Yeah. But I don't think me and Yanko are aligned if that's his perspective, because I did a video on this ages ago, like literally over a year ago, and my point was, it's more like the problem with support role is usually I just give that to the person who does like very tricky roles that require like a lot of nuance and aren't just about killing people. But in general, I go more towards the idea that it's like supportive, and I put support as the counterbalance to the carry. So my role is more, it's the idea that like, okay, if I have coldzera, like a lot of the game is built around him, he gets what he wants. The guys who don't get what they want and they have to like facilitate the star, they're the ones I put in the supportive category. So I never make it like a literal position like this one guy does it, but I definitely think it's like, in fact I described it I think in my videos like a spectrum basically. You're somewhere on the spectrum. And yeah, if you were like Zipnix or Crims or whatever, sometimes it'll be very extreme how far you are on the spectrum. Like, most players aren't going to be like that, where like every map, you know, they're like, give me the worst position, always have me be the anchor on us. You know, most people don't have as ridiculous as that, you know. Most people are somewhere in the middle on one side or the other. But the reason why I do think it exists to some degree is because you do get these really, really extreme ones like that. But it also counterbalances carries. You get people who literally get everything they want in the game, you know, because they're so good. It's like the same thing, you know. Most carries didn't get everything in every team because they can't do it, you know. You don't just give every AWPer, oh, take this peak mid every time if you want. No. But if you're Guardian, you go, yeah, fucking do it anytime you want, mate, you know. It's a range for me. Yeah,
I think it was always interesting to me because I know from even talking to coldzera himself, because I was just like, who's who? Because it was
fucking you heard the name dropper on this episode, Chad. He's fucking hanging out with Andy, having fucking, I don't know, Russian champagne or something. Then he's like, oh, hey, coldzera, like, short guys got to stick together. Corral. And they're like, hey, there we go. I got him, Chad. I got him. Come on.
I've got to let everyone know how fucking cool I am from hanging out with all these Counter-Strike players.
Okay.
We have an anti-bullying campaign going on here in Cologne at the moment.
We do, actually. We've been calling a lot of people out for it.
We've been
to be fair, they did do too much bullying in Germany. Some of it went way too far, for me, honest as well, you know. So I'm glad that they've gone the other way on that one. They've seen the light, you know. Just leave other countries alone and people who were in your own country. Right, Moses, what did coldzera say? Tell us.
No, because I remember back in, I think this was Cologne 2016, when I asked him, like, who's, like, the support player, and he actually said that he's the support player of that team, which was always very, very funny, because he's the one, when he's paired up with Taco, he's the one flashing for Taco all the time. But I'm of the opinion, I don't think people honestly think, like, I don't think you and Yanko, I mean, it's just a bit of fun that we can have on the desk, but I don't think you guys believe in, like, a hardcore support role anymore, but I do think it is a very weird thing that we have to construct that concept for a broadcast, right? Because it's like the easiest way to explain what someone is doing, and I think that idea of a support role has kind of been born from that sort of a situation.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a point, okay, that just to explain briefly why I think it has value as a term, is there's a saying that they actually have in basketball where they say that the only reason like, you know, in basketball, they literally, every team in theory on paper has to have these 5 positions. You have a center, small forward, power forward, point guard, and shooting guard. And it doesn't matter who's on your team, you will give the 5 players that are in the starting rotation one of those roles, right? So sometimes a player that played his whole career as like the point guard goes to another team. I mean, that's not that great an example because usually they stay as point guard. But, you know, they could be the shooting guard if they're just fantastic at shooting. You know, they're on a different, depending on what lineup is on the floor. Now, what they always say about that is that they only invented those position names so that an amateur can very quickly understand some of the basic differences, right? It's the idea the casual viewer knows roughly what a power forward does, gets rebounds, like, you know, goes sort of in the paint, like, you know, things. But the point is, if you ever look at actual players, and especially the best players in the world, they all break the rules of that shit. Like, for example, if you look at like Kevin Durant in the NBA at the moment, he plays like as if he was a shooting guard, but he's listed as a small forward. He doesn't do any of the shit that a small forward does. He doesn't do like fucking middle of the paint 10-foot like finger rolls or whatever, you know. He plays like as if he was a small shooting guard from 30 years ago. So the point is, like, I think it's good to have the framework because it's sort of like a shorthand that everyone understands the basics of. But I do agree that it's very rare that people are like literally like it would be like if every center in the NBA, every one of them was 7 foot, just only stayed a foot away from the basket, only did like spin moves or whatever. No, like half the players don't even do that at that position, you know. So I think there's a value to it. I agree that you can't go too extreme on it though.
I think like a good example is, you know, we would say that Zipnix would be a support player, right? But
sure,
to label him like that as a guy who sets other people up, sure, he sets them up to enter into the bomb site, but the reason he does that is because he's so fucking sick at clutching, right? Like, so it's to have him
so perhaps he could be the clutch role then, Chad.
Don't you dare fucking
the clutch role, perhaps? Would that be his role? Yeah.
Oh,
okay. There you go, Moses. I have turned your ally against you. Okay, so let me ask you a question then, Sponge. What would you call Zipnix then? What role should we give him?
I just use retarded names for things because I'm from Australia.
Jesus, I'm glad he finished that sentence. I just use retarded. Fucking hell, I thought you liked the guy. I know he's got a big head, but I think he's just a normal guy. That's just a big head.
As a broad sweeping statement, you would say that he's a support player, but like if I was to talk about him, I would, you know, if I had like a few more words, it would be like a bomb site anchor or like a clutch player or a mid to late round player, like that kind of stuff.
Clutch role specialist.
I missed that because I'm probably lagging, but let's hope it wasn't.
It was nothing important. It was nothing important. It was all fucking brain dead shit.
Okay. But yeah, I think like in terms of a broadcast, or to make it easier for people to understand, to use the term support player or he was a support player in a specific situation makes sense.
Okay.
But I don't think that a team looks at a person as a support player.
Much like genders, the support designation is fluid.
Indeed. Like Henry.
And a social construct, ironically. Ironic. See, in this case, Moses, it is a social construct. That is amazing, isn't it? It really is a spectrum. You're right. Yeah, it's absolutely fluid.
It's too good.
Right. Okay, I've got a question then. So, because I'll take it back to Na'Vi, which is the last point before our digression. So I just want to get your take, actually, on what you think the next few months are like for Na'Vi. Because I have to say, I do still think they've got some big flaws. Like, one of the things I've noticed is, because they still haven't figured out that whole thing of, like they've just decided, yeah, we are just permanently banning cash. Like, an obvious flaw they have is if they play anyone who plays Nuke, fucking hell, that's what Astralis showed us. If anyone plays Nuke and goes against them, and by the way, half the teams that are good out there do, is, you know, I mean, like, who can you even get if you're a Na'Vi? Like, basically, if you're Na'Vi, you have to hope you get series against SK and Fnatic. Those are the teams that aren't probably going to pick Nuke. Everyone else, in general, is probably going to do it. Nuke, FaZe, Astralis, VP, all these teams can pick it against you. So I do think that, I think they look a lot better, and I do think they have, like, you know, championship potential. But my problem is a lot of it at the moment for me comes from, like, the star players. Like, that's what they've fixed. They've got the star players on board again. And when you have 2 star players like they have, yeah, you can sometimes, like, steal maps that you probably shouldn't, you know. Like, maybe you have a shot at least when you play on a map that's, like for example, like Cobblestone's kind of, like, middling at the moment. At least they'd have a shot on it with those players. The problem is, like, there's so many good teams out there. Like, what's the actual next few months like? Like, what do you see for Na'Vi in that sense?
I don't think, like you're saying, the map pool's not deep enough to be like #1, right? I think
it's hard to see it, right?
Their cobble is really shaky. When I watch that, I sometimes I question what's going on with the rotations there because they can't be proactive on that map. Their Mirage, everyone seems to have Mirage as a middle ground map right now. It used to be one of their best, but I like the pace changes for them. Like they're bringing in a lot of more like quicker plays, which I think is catching people off guard for now. But once it starts to get adapted to, I don't know how much longer they can get away with that kind of stuff, because there are holes in that. But if they can bring Cobble back into their map pool, their train's pretty good. Overpass, yeah, we were saying that one's not.
Are they going to Sydney,
Improved?
Chad? Do you know?
Navi, no Navi in Sydney. It's North, FaZe, Astralis, Optic, SK, and then 3 ship teams.
Local teams, we call them, but I agree. That's also the term that I use for them. But local teams, yeah.
I can't see it unless Navi like have a really like they focus heavily on their weak points, or even do something that we wouldn't expect, which is bring Cache into their map pool. They're going to have a rough time unless they get not an easy run, but if they get a run that complements their map pool.
Sure. Okay, so obviously we can't talk about every team that was at StarSeries, so I want to pick the ones that I think have like a lot of immaterial potentially there and that are interesting ones. So unfortunately I'm going to skip Hellraise because I don't really give a fuck, quite frankly. And like, listen, as good as it was, like, you know, you're going to have to do it at more tournaments and then we'll talk about you. So in this particular scenario, it's no joke that this is the tournament that for me kind of showed what I've been banging on about for the last few months, that like we really could be in the era where there's all these mega dangerous teams, and you know, even like a quarter-final matchup is like deadly, you know. So obviously we're starting to see that with like Fnatic's coming back, G2 obviously got off the ground running. So one of the teams I want to talk about before we get to some of those ones is, to me, the team that is in the worst spot of every potential like champion team, and that is North. Because North is a team where they don't have a whole lot of X factors still, it feels like, to figure out, right? I think they know how they want to play. I think they've got it all pretty much down. They've got a pretty decent map pool. They've got good players. They've got a lot of talent. They've got experience. They've got good leadership. They've got every factor you could almost want on paper. And yet they don't even make finals. Like, they've now lost twice to an underdog in like a quarterfinal scenario. It's just like, to me, it's the most underwhelming team. It's like North is the only team I would actually pick out of all these teams. I'd heavily bet that they won't win the tournament, you know. Like, I think they have the potential to, but the difference is, like I was saying about Na'Vi there, if Na'Vi gets the right opponent and Simple and Guardian are going off, yeah, okay, they could win a tournament, sure. FaZe, if they win all these pistols up, yeah, they could win. I don't know how North can win at the moment, because I don't know what the fuck's wrong. What do you think, Chad? What is wrong with North? What's your take?
They've obviously got, like, when you look at that team on paper, the star power potential is huge. But the biggest issue that I have is they're not all activated at the same time. Like, yeah. I was watching a match with Cajun the other day, and he was just absolutely bodying people with the orb, but no one else was doing anything. Like, it was just him, just doing whatever he could, and no one else on the team was contributing in any way. Then you have games where Magix does the same thing, and Config does the same thing, but it's all, like, hit and miss. And I think that's an issue with their play styles, right? It's almost hyper aggressive. You think of a Magix on Overpass. Think about how aggro he is up to that fountain area. Like, that's not going to work every day of the week. And when that doesn't work, is he now out of the game? Do we not see him? Is he now a liability, just dying in that position, or is he able to play a different brand of Counter-Strike? I think with Config and Magix especially, they're still so young in their careers that they're potentially in a transitional period right now. Okay, they came out with a bang. The Epicenter win was sick. We saw how good those two players can be together. There could be an amazing combo going forward in Counter-Strike, but right now they need to learn how to play a different brand of CS in the way that they address the game. Because I think you look at the way that where they came from, it was probably just them playing in teams and being the star players. When Magix was in SK, he was sick, but it was just him getting multi-frags. It wasn't him contributing in a huge team effort. And there's probably still a little bit of that right now in North. They need to get to a point where, okay, if they're not getting all the right timings down, if they're not hitting all the sick headshots, they need to still be able to contribute in the team or play maybe a more passive style or a more, I guess, dynamic style. At the moment, it seems when they go and they have their mind set on doing something, they're going to be sick, and they're going to, if the stars are aligning, then they're going to hit those shots. But when they don't have those games, it's such a big liability for the whole team. Obviously, I'm a bit underwhelmed by AZ. When he first joined, I was like, this is going to be fucking awesome. Like, they've got this guy who he's been made to play different roles over his career so far because he's had a bit of a weird, rough ride. He'll just fit in here and he can play the role that whatever they wanted to. Let these new kids be sick. MSL was on the rise at that time too. When was that Vegas, where MSL was just, he changed his
that was the one where he had the sensitivity
shit. Yeah. But since then, it's not that they've dropped off. Like, this is the thing that I always talk to Jason about on the desk is that they're still a top 10 team. I just don't think at the moment they're all clicking together, or they've all had enough experience of how to play different versions of Counter-Strike to be consistent or to go up against teams who can stop their aggression.
Okay, what do you think, Moses? What's the problem with North?
I think there's three things, and I think some of them are going to be, a couple of them are pretty similar to Chad. I think one, Magisk and Config, I do think they've been exposed as pretty one-dimensional players. I think, still young, obviously, still can adapt and change, but I think their success came so quickly. I mean, remember, in Barcelona last year, people still thought Config was a cheater. Same with Magisk. I mean, people were just like, these guys can't play on LAN. They just cheat online. That's all these two players are. So I mean, their explosion to be some of the better players we have in the pro scene, at least on an individual level, was very, very quick and really culminated with. I think it was from like basically the end of E-League Season 1 is when we first saw Magisk really put together a good LAN tournament, like where he had multiple good LAN games, and then obviously they went Epicenter pretty quick after that. So I think those guys, because I mean it's similar. I mean, you think of Magisk on Mirage, it's like, yes, he's going to push down Mirage A ramp. That's how he's had most of his massive impact rounds on this map, is when he does that. MSL likes to push the upper B tunnels at times, so you if you're an opposing team looking into them, you can read those guys pretty easily. Two, I think, in many ways, they just seem to me to be a carbon copy of Astralis, where they have all the talent in the world and there's not really one big glaring issue that is like, this is why this team is not winning. Just something does not click in the pressure situations. I don't even know if I'd call it choking, just because of the fact that they don't have those like big leads that the old TSM and Astralis lineups did, but like they are just losing to underdogs, which is very, very surprising to see. But they also, this team just doesn't seem to have whatever it is at the moment, and that's kind of scary. The big thing is the third thing I wanted to mention was I was on the other end of the fence than SPUNJ when AZ came in for Rubino. I remember even on Counterpoints when we did that episode, I think it was with DDK perhaps, and I was just like, this is worrying. They've now they have the star players, they have the strength of individual talent, but removing one of those players who we tend to put in one of those like. The plays he makes, the impact he has is for the team. It's not for an individual. The guy who does the dirty work, like the Kiyoshima of this team per se, or the Dupree of this team, is now moved out. And now they're bringing in AZ, who we haven't seen be a star. They wanted more talent. They wanted more skill. And they don't know how to fit this much skill into one lineup. You have 4 players on this team who could all be a star, but have no clue of how to put that together as a team and make it happen. And because of that, you see AZ in some weird middle ground, where now we're seeing him at Starlighter. He had a couple of those games where he seemed like he was the carry, where he was the most impactful player, and then we saw games where he was a little bit more disappeared, a little bit more subdued. So I mean, I think they're really much like Astralis had the same issue when KRB joined the lineup for the first time. Kerrigan couldn't figure out how to work him into the lineup. So
yeah.
They have some of those issues that need to figure it out, and all because of that. It's not that they're bad. It's just they're not reaching the amount of potential that we see because of the talent, because of the very well respected in-game leader of MSL. They just have some issues that they need to get straightened out as a team.
Yeah, I definitely agree and echo the sentiment that you both said here. It's something I've noticed a lot of people have seen about the team, which is that one of their big problems is, if you look at them collectively, you're like, wow, all this talent, but they don't have the one star. Like, Magisk and Config aren't every game the one that's on. In fact, they have the exact opposite problem. They have every game, it's a different player who has a really big game. And so I do kind of definitely agree that I think, unfortunately, the success just came too soon. And so it just looked like, right, okay, Magisk and Config are literally just going to skip the line, and in like 6 months, they're already the top players. And the big problem with that is, I think skill-wise they can be. It's just that you notice it's very rare that you get like an actual prodigy type guy, like a Nico, who just comes out and bam, they're just fucking insanely good. Because it's not just about the skill, it's like the experience base, Like the difference is, if Magix is having a bad game, does he even know how to get himself out of that? Does he know how to be useful still in the game? Does he just do the set? Does he do what Skadoodle has famously done in Cloud9 recently, which is you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and when you're having a bad game, you just lose the game. That's it. You don't adapt in that sense. Now, obviously, in his case, he's a veteran, but a lot of young players suffer from that problem. That's why they're so up and down when you just look at the numbers. But then I also think, like, this is a nightmare team for MSL, because he's built his whole rep, and the reason he gets all this credit from analysts is because when he didn't have tools to work with, like stars, he was the guy who could sort of like construct a really good system and sort of figure out what the balance should be between the players that you do have in the team. And now he's got like the opposite problem. He's got all these tools that could be potentially amazing on any team, but what order do you use them in? I mean, the fact that they don't have the consistent star, it reminds me of an example, right? Okay, this is I'll give you this one, Moses. It's the throwback NBA example. So in the 90s, I think it was in like 1996, there was a Houston Rockets team, right, where the star player they had was Hakeem Olajuwon was his name, and he at this point in time, right, he was already getting towards the end of his career, but he still had like maybe 1 or 2 like really good years left in him. And then they had another star that they'd had from their championship second title, which was Clyde Drexler, and again he's getting on in his years. He had been a star, and what they did is they signed Charles Barkley, who himself another old star getting on, and the logic they used, right, was like, okay, one of us alone can't carry a team anymore and be like, the best player in the whole NBA. But if we have 3 of us, sort of the aggregate between the 3 of us, we can each carry a game. And unfortunately, what they didn't actually think about was they didn't. This has got to be the biggest oversight I've ever seen in like GM approach to the game. They literally signed 3 players, Moses, where all 3 of them played on the left side of the floor, and they all wanted to have access to the basket basically in the lane. Like Charles Barkley used to back you down really slowly, Clyde Drexler wanted to slash through the defense, and Hakeem Olajuwon was an inside player and he just did like a move and beat you one-on-one, right? So literally what they did, if you ever watched their games, they were like a good team, and they even made like the conference finals, but they were never going to win the NBA title, right? And what happened was that they literally had the most ridiculous system where they would go down and it would be like, right, it's my turn now. I'm doing well in the game, so you just move. You stand over that side, and then I'll do my move. And this, they were good players, so they could do the move. And then whoever was having the good game, he would do his moves, and they'd try and win off that. And then next game, right, he's not playing as well, right? It's your turn, and then the other guy would go. Like the problem is, you can see how that's not going to fucking win the title. All the best teams have like the one superstar player that you know what you get from him. The other players, that puts them in their place. They know what to do to help him, and then when they can have a moment, this is a team where it's almost like for example, at this last tournament, the best player was Cajun B. We haven't even mentioned him yet because he's not even supposed to be the star player. He's supposed to be the guy taking the back seat, and he's having to carry,
Well, think about, who was it? It was at the Major when they played VP on that infamous Cobble game. It was Config who was having that crazy game,
Magic's.
Right? Was it Magic in those A-halls? And he had just the monster first half where he had like 27, 28 kills, like nearing on 30 after just like the first half. And then he just spent the entire half just killing everything and then just went completely fucking silent as soon as they went into it. Like, if you were a player having that good of a first half, that's usually when, that's when you get that feeling as a player. I know, Chad, you probably had it, where, you get started on such a good foot that you're just like, oh, my God, everything's perfect. Like, I'm just going to fucking wreck everyone for this whole game. Like, you have a really good pistol round and you're just like, oh, everything feels great. Settings are perfect. Server's perfect. I'm just so much confidence. And that's when, you have those games where you just have impact throughout the game, maybe regardless of how the volume of your kills. And the fact that he just went silent so early on, I think it was halfway, maybe 6 rounds into the second half, he'd only gotten 1 or 2 kills after the first half. So I mean, that's that kind of young mental game that you have to overcome and that you have to come back into. And also, on the other end, when you have one player who carries you that hard through the first half, if you're on that team, sometimes it's difficult to get into the game as a player because you haven't had to be in any action. You haven't had to get any success, so you don't really get the feel of the game because before you get involved in anything, everyone's already dead. So the only times you ever see anyone is just when you get ran over. And that I think that's some of the struggles that they really encountered at the Major, but that just comes with experience as well. I still think, like Chad said, this team is top 10, and we've seen them at any point be able to beat some of the best teams in the world and be very competitive. It's just they're lacking. They lack that coordination to be consistent with it. They just need to figure some things out within this team that's going to get them to reaching that potential more frequently.
I think to touch on what you're saying with MSL about how he addresses this team right now, I really, when I was still playing and played against him, I saw similarities in the way that they addressed the game because, sure, he didn't always have superstars in his team. He had players who, maybe one superstar who would always get poached and then you have to rebuild and all that stuff. But the way that he would approach the game was he almost used his brain and the tactics that they came up with as the winning features. It wasn't someone coming in and getting an ace. It was a really cool execute and then pacing off their execute and then being able to fake off their execute and doing a really good T side because of that. And then on the CT side, just having solid crossfires and everyone knowing their theory. Whereas right now, he has the talent where he probably has to play and call a looser start, do more defaults, allow his teammates to find areas, to find gaps. And the problem with that is, as an in-game leader, to do that, he, to me, seems he would be better to be activated early, to be a second man in. But when you're when you're in-game leading and you're doing defaults, you want to try and stay alive for as long as possible so that you can make the best read or the best call. And that might be affecting his game, like in that regard, because being the in-game leader and then being like one of the last two guys alive in a 2v2 or a 2v3 situation is not one of the most skilled players you want left in that situation, right? You'd want someone else in that particular environment. So maybe that's an adjustment they have to make. On the CT side, I could see, like, because I am seeing these players like Config and Magix are still relatively young, what would be a really cool idea, I think, if they're willing to sacrifice some time, and maybe with all these online leagues at the moment, it's probably a good time because you get a lot more matches, you get a lot more competitive mindset when you play those games, is mix people around in positions, try new stuff out, make them see what it's like to have to rotate through here, because like I don't think Magix has been playing Counter-Strike for very long at all. He couldn't have played a huge depth of positions on the CT side to really have a good understanding of what to do in different situations. He's skilled, he has really good decision making in certain situations, and he can run in and headshot anybody, but that depth is so difficult to teach. And maybe now's a good time for like a development phase for North, because they're still going to be competitive, they're still going to be in the top 10. Maybe use this to build for the future. Don't just run into a brick wall with what you're currently running, having close matches and thinking, fuck, this is hard. Try something new, try something fresh, see if it will help build a game over a long period of time. But that, I guess, comes down to the mental strength of those players, and that could be a really big drama for that team, I think.
Right, wait there a sec. Let me just think of this. Right, I've just looked up while you were talking there, and I found a really, really weird pattern for North, right? So I looked at these last two tournaments that they've had, where they've had the same exact story, like do pretty well in their group phase, get to the playoffs, don't even get to the match you expect them to play. You know, in Katowice, you think they're going to play FaZe, and you think here they're going to play FaZe in the semi. They never get there. They lose the upset. I looked, right, and over the two tournaments, unless I've miscalculated, they've played 15 maps over those two tournaments. And by my count, they've only won 4 CT sides out of 15.
It's not
Well,
bad.
that's the maddest part, is that, first of all, there's some games they get in double-digit T rounds, but the craziest part is, you'd think it'd be the other way round.
Yeah.
If there's one thing star players and talent should do, it's just kill people on CT side, you know. But on T side, in that case, it's maybe not even that big a problem, but that's crazy. Like, I'm actually amazed they're getting out of groups and stuff with this sort of performance. You know, if you can't win any CT sides, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's actually very surprising to me. Even with the fact that I think at the moment it just seems like T sides are a little bit easier than CT teams or sides for most teams. I'm trying to think of why that might be. I mean, the crazy thing is, one thing about this team is, outside, like most other teams that we have said are like very good up and coming, like you can think of like a map that is very identifiable for them as maybe not the best in the world, but like, you know, that's the map that you can feel pretty confident that they're going to be able to beat most people on it.
Yeah.
I can't think of one for North.
It was Nuke, right? Like,
Yeah, it was Nuke, and that's gone to hell, hasn't it?
Well, I think the thing with that is everyone else has kind of taken a shining to it as well, right? And had to do it because that was as a hole in their map pool. But I think that's when we saw North having some of their most success, when they were beating everyone on Nuke, right? Like that, Epicenter was, they definitely would have been playing Nuke then, I'm pretty sure.
They were pretty good on it then, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's just an issue. Maybe they just need to focus and try and make one map their best.
I mean, that's the bizarre thing, is like, you'd expect it was the other way around, you know, because they're having similar results to a team like Na'Vi, for example, but they don't have the problem of like the weak map pool, you know. It's bizarre that they don't have one that they're gods on, and yet that they're good on almost everything except those. I mean, what's mad is they've even started being forced to play Cash recently, which is one they didn't want to play, and they're actually decent on that as well. It doesn't make any sense. Like, when you have a map pool like they do, that alone should be winning you some of these fucking best of threes against underdogs, you know. You can just tilt the map pool in your favour constantly, and you just win out in that particular respect, and they're losing them. So I think it's just so underwhelming when you consider all the talent in this
Who did they lose to at Starlight? Was it Hellraisers that beat them?
Yeah, Hellraisers 2-1.
God bless.
I mean, admittedly, that one, I'll give them credit in as much as this, okay? Both of the ones they lost, the best of threes, were very close. In fact, they could have 2-0'd both of them. They were in position to do it. But that excuse only, that's like a one-time only excuse, you know. Oh, I almost won this one map, but I didn't. Right, okay, I'll give you this one. You can't come back to me every week. Oh, you know what, I was so close to getting this one, just lost it. Well, these are losses, you know. Like, you can't just say that every time. There's a reason why you're losing these close games. And when you're losing to teams that, like, on paper, Hellraisers and Immortals should have no way to match up against fucking North. Look at the talent level on the two teams, and they're losing to them. So it's very bizarre stuff, right? Another team I want to talk to, and this will be like the one we'll pick to close to show up, is I want to get Chad's take on G2.
Okay. When it was like all announced and stuff, I thought it was a good move. I obviously I don't know the personal side of things. I don't know how it all worked with Scream and stuff, but that would have been just where I would have gone instead of Body, right? And I know that we're talking about having a more supportive player and stuff, but that team has one of the most prolific ones we talk about in MBK. So yeah. I thought he would have been able to fill that void enough. But this team, they started slow. Like I think they were like 1 for 7 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
League, not very good at all, and it just looked very underwhelming. But you could see what they were doing in their matches was actually leaning towards playing a better brand of Counter-Strike. Like they were doing, like they had a plan, right? They had strategies. They were doing executes. They were grinding out all the hard shit in these online matches, and it looked like all it took was them to get to LAN and get in that competitive environment. And they looked like they were a little bit looser in the LAN event, and it all kind of clicked at that point. I know we saw them get to the playoff and not be able to go very deep, but it looked like the team that we were all expecting from the beginning. And they obviously, having Shox and Kenny together, everyone says it's a huge thing for like a French team to have, and I think they'll be hopefully the best French team we've ever seen. But I think it's a growing period for them at the moment, because it looked like, from what I could see on the online games, they were forcing themselves to play the current meta Counter-Strike, doing proper strategies. I know we didn't see that unfold on the LAN. We saw all those force bars and shit come out, but it looked like they were going back to basics, which is great. And I think they're going to be a very dangerous side, and I like the growth that we're seeing out of Body as well. He had pretty good impact at the event. I was looking at the stats before. He had some good rounds, some good plays. So it's very promising. I just think at the moment, like you're saying, with all these super teams, with all this star power at the moment, it's so difficult to know what's going to define one team from being the greatest in this period. And I think this is when the outside of the game stuff is really going to have a huge impact.
Okay. Moses, what did you think after seeing him online? Like, I know you were very skeptical of them, so where do you land now that you've seen not just the 3-0 one, but then the playoff loss?
I'm not hopping on the train the way perhaps Henry G is, but I'm excited. I think it looked much better than I thought it would. I was very skeptical when the lineup got together, as you mentioned. Although I actually, just to touch on, I did like the Body over Scream pick that they did. I thought Body was one of the great revelations of all the struggles of one of those French teams towards last year, was the fact that he got a chance to get noticed in the scene. I think he's a phenomenal player from what I've seen so far. So what I liked most about them is they seem to actually be like, Chad called it a better brand of Counter-Strike. I'm just going to call it like Counter-Strike in general. They seem like they actually put thought into like how they wanted to actually play the game, and how they're actually going to, some wrinkles. That was the first time I'd actually seen tactical innovation in a French team in some time, getting away from a lot of the other stuff they did, focusing on fragging. But like that game they had against SK, was awesome to watch, to see them as CT, like pushing out of Monster, getting aggressive over at the B bomb site in the mid rounds. Like when there's action on the other side of the map, they were actually taking control away from the action and just being proactive on the map. Was like, as a team, was really, really cool to see from them. So I mean, and all those signs are very, very promising. And then on top of everything else, I mean, this isn't having anything to do with the game, but just in terms of like the team itself, like when I saw them all hanging out, this was probably the first time in a long time I've seen them like smiling and having fun within their team and like having a good time. And that was like crazy. Like they were all at the venue, like set up and like playing Battlegrounds or playing Counter-Strike or playing whatever the games they wanted, but they were doing it like together and having like fun. It actually seemed like they wanted to be a team. I mean, some of the events at the like last year was just like, what are you guys still doing together? Like it just seems like you all hate each other. So I mean, it all seems promising. It seems like it's in the right direction, saying all the right things. Like we're here for the long haul. We're not just going to stop. We're not going to quit at the first sign of adversity. Especially I think they're not going to have any judgments on their path until the major. But I mean, everything just seems like it's going in the right direction for these guys finally. And this is just another team where you look at it and you just say, there's almost too much skill for them not to become one of the most dangerous teams in the pro scene.
Yeah. I mean, I actually did think that it was very bizarre what happened in that FaZe series, because you had all these things happen that, listen, if these things repeat and it becomes a pattern and I'm just wrong, fair enough, I tip my hat. But I just don't see a world in which, like, you're going to lose all 6 pistol rounds again, especially with a team with this much skill. Then you got to add in, like, that series was so weird to me because, like, in the 2 games that they lost, Shox was just so, like, muted. It was unreal. It's like he didn't even play any kind of, like, style of CS that I've seen him play before. He almost played, like, I wouldn't say, like, scared, but just, like, very default almost. He just played like as though he was just another player. And in theory, he's the best player on the team, you know, one of the best players in the world. So it baffled me that they didn't get more out of him there. Like, especially that last game, which was the train one, was the decider. I don't know why he kept AWPing so much. It was very bizarre. It's another example of, like, come on, mate, you're one of the best rifles in the world. Do something.
Oh, yeah, it almost felt like maybe they just, like, trains on a map that they feel super confident on at the moment. So he was just like, I think maybe he just felt like he had to AWP like that. No?
They've been doing it constantly. Like, watching them from all the Pro League, it looks like their CT setups are all based around double AWP. It's like, well, if we can get double AWPs up, let's just fucking do it. And I question it as well because Shox, I agree, is one of the best rifles we've ever seen in the game. And to see him getting stunted by having to or choosing to pick up an AWP, he's so stationary with it. It's like, Kenny, you go around, you get what you need to get done, but Shox just seems like he's going to sit there and hit the shot kind of AWPer. And I don't think
that's what doesn't make sense as well, right? Because, like, yeah, you're totally right on that, by the way. Whenever I've seen him AWP, he's an AWPer where it's like he can hold an angle, but it's like, think about how much you lose as a result of just sitting and holding an angle.
I would prefer for him to rifle and them just to be more proactive with Kenny. Just move him around as a pawn more, send him on missions to find picks, keep him moving. Like, make sure that he is the one. If you need an AWPer at a bomb site, just move probably the best AWPer in the world to that bomb site. Don't make Shox do it. It's like when we had Happy picking up the AWP and shit. I was like, Happy, what the fuck are you doing? Like, just you're an in-game leader as well, so you can see where the problem is. Instead of you trying to fix it, just bring Kenny over here, send some other cunt over to A, we'll sort it out like that. It's just like, come on, guys.
You know, the funny thing is, you've just reminded me, actually, of something about Astralis that I think has been actually very impressive for me about how they're using Device, is that they're doing that all the time on CT. Yeah. They're sending him to the other site when they make the read that that's where it's going to be, and he's having impact doing it. And the funny thing is, it's actually not that many AWPers do it at the moment in CS. They really do just go to their spot that they play. And yeah, they have a different setup within that spot, you know. They have like the 3 positions they play, and then if they have a guy with a flash, or they have the supportive player next to them. But the amount of AWPers that actually go to the other side, it's not that often, you know. And the funny thing is, I don't know if this is just some pure coincidence, but obviously Device was tagging up in tribute to Sunder, who used to play in Zonic's old MTW teams. Yeah. And that is literally what they used to do with that guy. Because he was like a good AWPer, but he wasn't like the best. He was actually very similar to Device in this sense, you know. He used to be a rifler, then he turned AWPer, and he mainly was the AWPer in as much as, like, he knew, like, what shots he could hit, and he would just set up for those. And the key thing they used to use him for in their team was they had a brilliant in-game leader, Ave, and he would literally just make a read, like, okay, I'm pretty sure they're going to do, like, a slow banana push on Inferno, so actually you're going to swap over, and you're going to be with, like, say, like, Zonic was the rotator on that map. You two are going to set up there with the AWP, and the idea is, like, I've always thought, this is the part that doesn't make sense, is why more teams don't do it, is if I play against Guardian, right, and then play Mirage, and I always know he's in the window room, true, I can't go window because he just kills everyone. That's a really great thing to have. But imagine how much more frightening it is if I'm like, right, in that case, we're going to do a slow push onto the balcony, and then suddenly he's on there. Well, I can't anticipate that. I can't know it. Yeah. So the way I enter that balcony will be totally different than if I knew he was there. So I get that it's a very specialist thing to do. You know, you have to know how to play a bunch of positions on a map, basically. That's not easy to do, but there's so many more teams, if they had the right AWPer, I feel like could get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, and I think, like, the player obviously has to be comfortable with doing that. If you look at somebody like Skadoodle just seems like an uninspired AWPer without an in-game leader to tell him what to do, right? Like, but then you have somebody like, I know this is not the same tier of example, but it's the best one I can give. When we had Yam in the team and he was feeling it, like this, he was on. He was the one telling me where he wanted to go, and I just told everyone else what to do around him. And he'd find that opening pick, he'd leave that spot, he'd go to another spot, and it's so, like you're saying, it's so much more daunting, right? You think, where the fuck is the AWP going to be? We need a pop flash every corner. That's something that I think Fnatic do really well with their AWPs, right? Because they move the AWP between 3 good AWPers, Dennis, JW, and Olaf. They just move it around, and you never know what corner that AWP is going to be watching, and it'll grab you a kill and a huge advantage from early in the round. So I think if teams with only one AWPer, like an Astralis, they do the right thing with device. That's what other teams with like G2 example should be doing with Kenny S. It's just going to have so much of an impact on the match and keep the opponent guessing.
I think that's. I mean that. Yeah, I mean that's all right. I think the one reason why we don't see it more often is I feel like there aren't as many oppers at the moment who are as assertive in what they want to do as like a Guardian, as a Kenny, as a Device. I know Device has big input on how he plays with the AWP, and I think there's still going to be teams that are. I think there's still players like a Skadoodle who is like obviously uninspired is a good way to put it, lazy as well, just like doesn't want to rotate across the map, doesn't want to get to a new position. But you see a lot of oppers like that where it is, and I think this is still an issue like with what Navi had on the CT side is almost like the CT sides in general just seem lazy at some point with some teams where you don't realize that you have to call strats on both halves of the game, you know? Like, it just feels like CT teams are just kind of like, all right, let's just go in our setup, everyone go to the spots that we've assigned them to, play your game, and then we'll communicate rotations in the mid-round when we're seeing what's happening. But you can't do that. You have to have plays called for the defense as well. You have to understand where you're rotating before the action happens. So I think CT sides in general across all of Pro CS at the moment just seem weak for the most part. You know, outside of like the top teams, I think most teams really struggle and don't have great CT sides. And I think part of that, I mean, just to circle back to the beginning of the show, has to do with a lot of the economy. It's just harder to manage on the CT side, so you don't always have the tools that you want to use it. And I think that's why we're kind of getting uglier CT sides coming out.
I mean, to bring it back to G2 again, I legitimately think this team will like. I mean, I realize we've only seen one LAN, so we'll see what the others are like. But I think this team is going to win tournaments. Like, I actually think they have all the tools to do it. And I also think a really positive sign that I saw from Pro League and then going into this LAN was that they have like a map pool that's pretty legit. Actually, they can play a whole bunch of the maps. They don't. I mean, obviously they still do the classic like fucking envious ban Mirage, like refuse to play it. But everything else they can at least play. I mean, they actually play Nuke and Train. Now, I know like they played Nuke towards the end in Envious and they played it a little bit in the old G2, but they were never like specialised on that map. They're pretty decent on Nuke actually. Train was a map that all the French teams for the last couple of years have been fucking garbage on. Like they've never understood that map. So I think when you look at the maps that are out there, I think they're going to have a pretty solid map pool. I think they've got the star players to do it. I admit they're obviously a team that has like almost sort of one style, you know, and that has to hit, and they have to be hot to win the tournament, sure. But put it this way, here's how I'll frame it. I would put my money now, even though they're one tournament behind, that by the end of the year, I think G2 will win more tournaments than FaZe will. I have more confidence in them to be an elite level team. Okay, like you give me each of you give me what's your prognostication for G2, Moses, and then we'll close the show on that.
I think for the rest of the year, I think they'll get top 8 at both of the majors, and I think they will win 3 non-major events.
Okay, that's bold. That's bold. He's come right round now. If that's him not on the hype train, Sponge, what the fuck does he look like when he's on the hype train?
Okay, 3 might have been a bit much.
Okay. Oh, we'll bring it down now. Then it's a negotiation process. Okay,
we can leave it there.
Okay.
What's the next event? Is it Austin?
Listen, bitch, they're gonna win tours, and I'm gonna
double check for you.
That's gonna be 1 for me.
Okay.
Okay.
I know that they're at that summit, I think.
I could knock out a Summit, a DreamHack Austin, and a DreamHack Tours and just call it a year, couldn't I? That'd be not bad.
Let's see. Are they at the Summit? Oh, I lied. Actually, that's envious. Apparently, they're not at the Summit.
I know they're at DreamHack Tours. Both the French teams are going there.
Where's Austin? Austin's here. They're at Austin.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if they don't win Austin, there's probably something wrong. Okay. Jason's comments aren't too far off if they attend open events.
They did sound a bit far off as soon as they lost my mouth. I was like, 3. That's what I'm going with, eh?
Okay. Well, for them to win Austin, the other teams are Hellraisers, Immortals, Liquid, Heroic, Cloud9, Gambit, and Luminosity.
Yeah.
So I can see them. I can see them being like top 4s at the big events. You know, like at the next major, I can see them as a top 4. Definitely a threat for that kind of position. I don't think the turnaround for them winning an event will be until the second half of the year, until after the player break. Besides DreamHack Austin, which is.
What about DreamHack Tours?
Are they DreamHack Tours?
Yeah,
they are.
Okay, well, fuck. Well, let's say they win that one as well then.
Yep.
Okay.
That's a terrible prediction, but Jackson's ruined everything.
Do you have any final words?
Is there?
Yeah, true. Okay. Do you have any final closing message for everyone, Sponge?
No, I don't.
I'm Device from Astralis, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.